All right, we're ready to get started. If you all could, I don't know if you guys can hear me. If you can hear me, please, we're getting ready to get started. So if you could, there you go, thank you. Good evening to everyone. Welcome to the Monday, February 6th, 2023 meeting of the City Council. It's a work session. We're pleased to have our friends from ESC with us today. But before we begin, I thought we would have a moment of silence for Joe Sautner, who was the animal control officer for Falls Church, who recently passed away. So if you join me, maybe just a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you very much. So do you need to roll, Cindy?
Sure, Mayor.
All right.
Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Sean Siskott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mayor Tarter?
Here.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. So the first item, we've got a busy agenda this evening, a lot going on. For those of you who aren't familiar with our work sessions, the discussion is with those at the table, but you're welcome to listen and make comments or communications to us later. But this isn't like a normal public hearing where we'll have testimony and the like from members of the public. It's just for those folks who maybe are unfamiliar with our workings. But the first item on the work session is our Community and Government Operations Energy Action Plan update. We've got our friends, as I said, from the ESC with us this evening. Thank you all for the fine work you do throughout the year, and particularly for joining us tonight. Anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead. Wyatt, is it you or is it Andy? Who's going to take over?
So we're going to turn it over to Andy to take the lead on the staff presentation. We do have members of the ESC who are here, and we're glad to have this as a joint session to talk about the scope of work and the schedule of work for both the community energy plan, the development of a community energy plan, and the development of the government energy plan to accelerate our progress in meeting the adopted goals of the City Council and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Andy, let me turn it over to you, and we look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Wyatt. Thanks for the opportunity to come talk this evening. Excited to have several members of the ESC here, so Chair Joseph Strizzi, Vice Chair John Ward, and Mike Trauberman. So, I want to talk for a couple minutes, maybe kick things off to talk through kind of where we've been, kind of from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint, the challenge ahead of us, and then what we're going to do with our energy plans here this year to map out a path forward in order to accomplish those. So, as you all know, we've been tracking community level greenhouse gas emissions with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments since 2005. Notable progress in 2020, we met our goal of a 20% reduction that was set in 2017. It's quite an accomplishment when you think about the population of the city of Falls Church has grown 34% in the same period of time. A couple observations to share. So electricity consumption in the city was up 11% in that period of time, but the resulting emissions were down 39% due to a cleaner electrical grid. So less coal, more natural gas and renewables. Statewide push for clean energy matters. Transportation is a challenge. Only 3% reduction in on-road emissions in the 15 years. On-road emissions were 37% of our overall 2020 emissions. So making an impact in transportation is one of our big challenges. And then finally, 2020 was kind of a unique year, with the COVID-19 pandemic. So some of the changes that came about that year are, I think, with us here to stay, and others have kind of passed on. So the total impact on long-term results is a little unclear. The goal to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030 is a significant challenge for the city. It's a further 37% reduction from 2020's results. So think about that in the context of how we operate the city and live every day. It involves some big changes for us. So what are we going to do to get there? The city entered into an MOU with COG last year to enlist their help. I'm pleased to share that last week COG made a task order award to ICF Incorporated, consulting firm with significant experience helping jurisdictions with their energy plans, including several of our neighboring jurisdictions here in Northern Virginia. We've combined both the community and the government operations energy plans into a single task order to save both time and cut resources. So 3 main components of this. First is establishing greenhouse gas emission baselines and projections for both the community and government operations. We've been working on the community baseline information with COG since 2005. We're in really good shape with that. With the city operations, we've got some homework to do in collecting information and establishing a baseline. So that's one of our first tasks. And then what happens, between now and 2030 if, continue as business as usual. So buildings stay the same, our fleet stays the same here in the city. From a community standpoint, what growth do we assume that the community is going to see? And then, what's going to happen with the utility grid as Dominion continues to evolve their sources of energy. The community plan has 3 main areas of focus. So commercial building energy use, residential building energy use, and transportation. And the government plan has, similar areas of focus: building energy efficiency, fleet optimization, and the use of renewable energy. The intended output of both plans is some actionable stuff, right? So a list of proposed actions the city can take with rough estimates of costs, benefits, and likelihood of success. The idea is to have proposals that can become work plan, budget, or CIP items for consideration in future years. Then I'll look for ways to leverage outside capital where possible. There's, as everybody knows, there's lots of money from the federal government through a variety of different plans. And so which of those elements will apply to the City of Falls Church and our residents and businesses, and what can the city government do to help our residents and businesses take advantage of those opportunities. Period of performance with ICF runs through October. Our goal is to have the government operations plan completed by the end of June and the community plan completed by the end of September. We started our discussions with COG and ICF last week on the community engagement strategy. So we've got up to 7 staff and stakeholder meetings, with each of the plans to lay out, have more conversations with them tomorrow on what that starts to look like. From a fiscal impact to the contracts awarded, work can be completed with the resources allocated, and we're gearing up to get going. We are reviewing the community engagement details to ensure we've got the appropriate outreach and accessibility, to our community. So there's a potential budget amendment, that'll be coming, I think, later this month to address some potential, minor increase in costs. So with that, we'll take some questions.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for the update. We appreciate it. We know a lot of work has been going on behind the scenes. And why don't we start? And I tell you, Mike, John, I don't know if you guys want to get up to the table. You're certainly welcome. We could scooch and find some room for you. Why don't we try to create a little bit extra room so everyone can be up? Mike, how about you too? You want to come on up? Why don't we start with questions or comments from ESC so that, we hear what you guys have been up to and what your thoughts are on what we've done and where we head from here. Joseph, I don't know if you want to start.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm Joseph Shrizzi, the chair of the ESC. I know a lot of hard work has gone into this from, a variety of my colleagues. I think if there was one point that I would hark on myself, just with this time, is just that, we're on track on our goals according to 2020 time, right? When there was no traffic, everyone remembers the streets were empty, people were not driving, there was just less economic output. And like Andy mentioned, and you consider that there is traffic again, people are building more things and using more energy and all of that. Again, we're really not on track to hit the goals that the City Council has set for reducing emissions by 50% by 2030. So there are going to have to be you know, significant changes. And I think that this is the Energy Action Plan is going to be one of those, you know, solid steps that we can actually, you know, concrete steps that we can take for that. So I'm really excited for that. Would you like to get into some more specifics of that? We can go to gentlemen. Okay.
Very briefly, I do appreciate the funding that's gone into this. As you said, this is by the way, John Ward with the ESC, Vice Chair. Been a long time coming, but we appreciate the city putting this resources to this. I think the one thing that popped into my mind was I was reading the staff report. We have a community goal of 50% versus 2005 by 2030. And as I read the staff report, I saw there's a point in there where it says the city government operations side is at least 50%, but possibly more. It was sort of a little bit vague there as to what the goals were going to be. And I want to emphasize the opportunity here for the city to lead by example with shooting for possibly deeper cuts than that by 2030 to take a look at what's possible there. I think we've made that point. I think in some notes before. I think the contractor has their marching orders pretty well from the statement of work that was issued, but that aspect there of what should the city side be doing is going to be a little bit of give and take and probably some back and forth with city council as to what your options are as to what the cost would be for how fast you want to accelerate the city and school operations towards lower greenhouse gas emissions. So just a heads up that there's going to be some of that going on in terms of it'll be cheaper to do a slower and more expensive to do it on an accelerated timeline. So just want to make sure that's put that out there. But thank you for your time.
Thank you for yours. Mike, anything you want to add?
Sure, why not? Thanks very much for having us here. I've actually been following energy plans that have been developed in our neighboring jurisdiction with a particular focus on Arlington. And their energy plan was first done, I think, in 2013, and they updated it in 2019. And they're about to embark on their third energy plan. And I think it's required as part of their comprehensive plan, but I don't think, so we do a chapter 5 here. They actually have a section for an energy plan within their comprehensive plan. So they're coming up on the third iteration. And a lot of what I've seen in theirs and other jurisdictions around here is, it's a lot of high level, here are goals and here's some, objectives and some strategies, but they've been having a hard time getting to the specific strategies. In Arlington, after they did their energy plan, they did something called, they did a whole community outreach and everything, and they tried to come up with a implementation framework. And that kind of kicked around, and they spent a lot of time working on that, but it didn't really turn into anything. There was no formal thing done. So now they've transitioned to something called the Community Energy Plan. I think it's called the Roadmap, which was just released, I think, in the fall. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's on their website, which is supposed to get to more of the specifics. And, so my point would be that as we do this, and I know we've spelled out to the contractor what it is we expect from them, that we try to channel them into the specifics and, the cost benefits, the dollars, where we can do things, as opposed to sort of more the high level. I know we need some goals and objectives, because if you don't have them, you don't know where you're trying to get to. But a lot of this stuff, I'm not sure we need to reinvent as we go along. It's been done in a lot of jurisdictions. I know Falls Church is different than other jurisdictions, and obviously things need to be tailored, but I'd love to focus more on the specifics as we move through the process. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Why don't we now move on to council? Do folks on council have some comments or questions they'd like to make? Go ahead, Letty.
I defer to Debbie since she's actually liaison to ESC.
Well, I think Mike articulated what we've been talking about for the past couple of years, which is how you get to a plan that is actionable and what those costs are. You can't make a decision on what's actionable until you go through the process and define what those specific steps are, and then make the tough decisions about how much we actually value. We say we value it. What does that mean in dollars and cents and labor and plan? So I think, the ESC is really on the right track and driving some actionable. Like, let's skip the first two that Arlington did and just get to the third iteration of the energy plan where there are actionable things that we can really do to make a difference, not just keep kicking the can down the road. It's going to take some really tough decisions in the next 5-10 years to decide how much we really value reducing these greenhouse gases. And it's going to take a lot of community engagement. We've had ups and downs with getting our community engaged in the past, but I think, with you all at the helm, we have some real opportunity to do that. Not only in just participating in community surveys, but in participating in the action as well, because that's the only way we're going to get there, truly. So that's what I was going to add, other than, thanks to all the folks that are here in the room who spend a tremendous amount of their own personal time to the benefit of the city and the benefit of us all, really. So thank you.
All right. Who are we going to next? You want to get around the table? Why don't we go around the table? Ms. Leon?
Thank you so much. I'm very excited about this, and I'm loving these dates. 6:30 is going to be here before we know it as the first deliverable date. So love that. Just to help me understand, a couple of questions. The first one being, we're having this contractor, ICF, have 7 staff and stakeholder meetings for each plan. Have you given the contractor some insights as to what you define are stakeholders, or are they coming forth to the table and making suggestions on stakeholders? Like, who are they?
So I would say the stakeholders for each are a little different, right? Yes, I've given them a kind of an initial cut of, here are the different groups that we need to touch. How do we sequence between where we are today to an end product and the time frame that we're talking about? The COG folks are a little uncomfortable with the schedule targets that we've put out. This is about half the time that other jurisdictions normally take with this. We're going to try it anyway, but trying to line up the right community engagement discussions, to not only kind of talk with a bunch of folks, but to be able to kind of hone in on a plan in that time frame is a challenge. So goal is to have a more detailed schedule that kind of lays out those steps by the end of the month. So we had our initial call with them less than a week ago.
So let me ask this another way. Is there intention to include not only just local stakeholders, but regional and national stakeholders? Or what's the extent of geographics on the stakeholder?
The intent thus far is focused locally. Right? If y'all have suggestions on in regional from the standpoint the COG's heavily involved in this process as well. But if y'all have other suggestions, we're open to it.
And regional, in that several members of the ESC, like Mike has said, have spent a tremendous amount of time looking what other jurisdictions have done and what the state's done and what's been done across the country. So not directly in that engagement, but indirectly through those who will be participating in that survey.
You've got a list, a target list. It's just working with COG to just get it, groom it to the point where they're comfortable, because they're probably going to be leveraging some other relationships and stakeholders. Gotcha. Okay. Is there any way to take a peek on how this deliverable is progressing, like for that 6:30 date? Without messing up the schedule, is there any way to kind of share drafts, even though if it's not a final version?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be part of the schedule that we provide to you.
Thank you so much.
All right, anyone else along this way? Did you have something, Dave?
Thanks a lot. Andy, if you ever run into any roadblocks at COG or you'd like me to participate, please let me know on that. I want to make sure that runs as smoothly as possible. Secondly, I'm interested as you move forward that we provide alternatives and funding sources, both for government and the private sector. I think the Washington Post had a really interesting visual that really brought a lot of the sort of the vague ideas into something typical person could actually understand and maybe do something about. So hopefully we can come up with something that is this kind of communicative to the public about specific actions that they can take. So like others, I'm interested in specifics, as you mentioned, but I also am interested in assisting people in getting there, helping them with what the alternatives are, and if there's funding available either for the government or the private sector, that be part of the report, because I want to help people get to where everyone wants us to be.
Completely agree, right? And I think those are some of the areas we're going to focus on. I think, if anything, the last 6 months for me, you've heard all about all this money that's come from the federal government. It's really complicated, right?
Yeah.
There's like all these different programs. Some of them are for individual homeowners and rebates and tax credits, and there's all these rules for each one of them. And I think there several outlets have done a good job starting to distill those down into something folks can digest. My sense is it becomes a longer term engagement for us to think about how to support. Right? Folks aren't all going to go buy their new heat pump, this summer. That'll be an ongoing thing over the next several years. So what resources can the city put together to help folks as those decisions for themselves come up over the next 5 years, right? So tracking exactly, I think what you're saying, the goal is to figure out how to leverage all of these resources and things that are out there and available to us. Another recent, thing that's taken place that I think is notable for us to consider is, I think everybody's talked about commercial property assessed clean energy, CPACE before. So the state of Virginia has now officially launched their statewide program. That's something that's happened here in the last month. And it'll make things, I think, a lot easier for jurisdictions like us, with limited resources, to take advantage of a program rather than trying to stand something up on our own. And that becomes an outlet for, in particular, businesses and larger buildings here in the city to take advantage of some good financing to make improvements. And so there's a role for us to play to make that work, right? But thanks.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Lily?
Thank you. Thank you, Andy and ESC, for joining us. And so I want to third, I think, the comment that was made by Mike and Debbie. I want to make sure the statement of work reflects that we do want to get to very specifics, because I think we all know by now, you should drive less, you should have more density, you should retrofit your buildings. That's not particularly actionable. And I think because climate change can seem like such a daunting existential crisis, I want to drill down from policy to strategy to actual projects, so that we can actually make some real trade-offs and decisions on where we're going to make investments. And so if the statement of work has that level of detail, great, but if not, I do want to make sure that the outputs we get on June 30th and September 30th are actually going to be specific projects, like which building should we retrofit and how much how much energy reduction should we get to in each of these buildings. Let's make sure we have measurable kind of outcomes for each of those projects, because otherwise it'll be really hard to track progress against these really lofty goals. And so if each of the projects can have individual metrics as well, that's a good way to ensure that we're making progress that will ultimately add up to those greenhouse gas emission goals we have. So that's kind of one general comment. So thank you all for starting off on that. Second question I had, given the comments about how the baseline in 2020 was taken during COVID, and I think I saw in the staff report that they might re-baseline. Is that going to kind of figure out where we are, or did I read that wrong?
I don't believe there's any intent to re-baseline 2020. So we've got a good baseline of information for the community. Those are the inventories that COG's been taking since 2005. We don't have a baseline for government operations.
Okay, so that's the part that's going to get baselined.
That's the part that we have to focus on, starting this week, on collecting the appropriate information and establishing when that baseline will be.
Got it.
It'll be dependent on the information we can put together.
Okay. So in order to hit the 2030 goals, that we might actually have a bigger uphill climb because some of the 2020 data might be a little skewed, is kind of what you're saying to us.
I think from a community standpoint, I think that's what the point Joseph made.
Got it.
Weren't driving around very much in 2020,
Yep.
right? There was a lot of things not happening. And so it wouldn't dismiss the 2020 results in totality, though. There were a lot of good things, I think, that happened and were reflected in the 2020 results. Electric grid, we have changed behaviors, I think, as a result of coming out of the pandemic, but it's probably a little optimistic, to think that all of that sticks.
Okay. So on that note, between the government versus the community, obviously, to John's point, we should lead by example in the government, but roughly, like if we were to break down, what contributions the government can provide versus the community, I want to make sure that we're level set on expectations. Like even if we do a lot on the government side, it probably doesn't move the needle in terms of the overall community, right? Do you have a rough sense of what that breakdown is?
It's less than 5%.
Okay.
Does that sound right, John? Yeah.
Yes, so that's important for us to know, is that even if we make a ton of investment and say we get, City Hall and all of our buildings to be essentially net zero, that probably doesn't even make a dent to larger community. And so I think there needs to be a hard message with the community that it requires probably sacrifice on everybody, right? The government can lead by example, but it does take a lot of community work. So I think that needs to be a message as part of the change management that comes out of this, is the community investment part of it and the changes required. Thank you. Because I know we often talk about things like, hey, let's go and convert our vehicles to a green fleet and other things, which are all really good. Again, lead by example, certainly good to do, but in terms of actually moving the needle on these numbers, like we need everybody to do their part too. And that's an important message. Third question, do we have examples where, or maybe the consultant has examples, where such dramatic reductions are possible? Or is this new uncharted territory for us?
Well, COG has broken down in the greenhouse gas emissions, like all these numbers that we're talking about are all from COG. They've broken it down into like very specific line items, like where things are coming from. We know like what percentage is from air travel, from under transportation, from citizens in Falls Church, right? So I don't think there's any mystery of where it's coming from. So we can definitely focus on specific line items and what's going to move the needle the most based on that, I think.
Andy, you?
I would add, that this is somewhat uncharted territory for everybody. I think we've seen a lot. There are it's not a mystery where the opportunities are. As I've talked internally with the staff about this a little bit, I'm like, why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is, right? When you think about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it's commercial buildings, residential buildings, and transportation. There are other things in the calculation, but those are the three things that generate most of the emissions. Those are the things we should focus on. So we structured the engagement with COG and ICF to focus on those pieces. And so there are a lot of communities, I think, around the country doing some great things and leaning into this. I don't think anybody's gotten to a 50% reduction in their greenhouse gas emissions yet.
That's kind of what I was going here. Is there like a community we can point to and say, let's just follow what they did, because they're seeing some really great success and measurable success there?
I think there are individual elements that we can see from different communities around the country, but nobody's solved this, I think.
Okay. Well, let's try to learn, because none of this is super crazy exotic stuff. Like, we know how to do it. It's just a matter of whether we're willing to make those sacrifices and investments and put it all together into a plan that we will actually do. So last question, kind of a broader question, and maybe this is a little related to the last point of how big this uphill climb is. Obviously, this is focused on reduction of greenhouse gases. How much should our broader strategy also be on resiliency and adaptation? So if we can't get to these numbers in 2030 and we're going to continue to see the effects of climate change, how much effort and work and investment should we put on adapting for the impacts of climate change as well? This is, I know, not related to plans, but while I've got you all experts here, that's kind of a question I've had in my head.
Sure. There's things that we can do to mitigate climate change and our own impact that are also part of resilience, right? Like lowering the amount of rainwater runoff on surfaces and rezoning things that are currently zoned for parking lots into housing that can capture more rainwater. And so one of the largest things on resilience is dealing with increased expectation of storms and rainwater. So doing that now, helps the bay, helps us deal with that now, helps lower emissions, lower heat island effects, and things like that. Is also preparing ourselves at the same time for resilience. So I don't want to give up and say, okay, let's split the budget between resilience and mitigation. I don't think it's time to do that yet, personally, and based on the kind of research that I've done on that, I think it's still time to invest in lowering emissions however we can. And if we're really smart about that and thoughtful about it, I think that will increase our resilience in the future too.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. I like that optimistic
Okay.
perspective, but keep that in mind, I guess, is that
Would either of you like to add anything to that?
Joseph covered it well. I think you'll look at, I think Northern Virginia Regional Commission has, they've set up a webpage and they've done some analysis. It's out there of what, the regionally, what the different risks are. And for us in our region, the predictions are higher temperatures, and excessive rain, right? So things that we can do, some things that help climate that also make us a little more resilient. So more insulation in residences and in buildings, that kind of thing. Saves energy, reduces CO2 emissions, and allows you to stay cooler or stay warmer in a power outage.
Well, the good news is I think we have a pretty ambitious stormwater kind of infrastructure plan. So
have that, right. So that's good. And we've had Mike has, I think, helped spearhead a couple of things recently and making sure that some of the new buildings, especially the special exception processes, are looking at increased, the expected increases in stormwater above and beyond what the Army Corps of Engineers traditionally has used. So those kind of things, especially in our stormwater planning, again, towards resilience, but anticipating those increased rainfall events.
Great. Thank you all.
Bill?
Tim Stevens and I have talked about a topic that I'll try to render intelligibly. Tim, interrupt me if I don't, which is we're looking, I think, I'm at least looking to you all who are leaders in this area to make the argument that although we march under the little city flag, we're really a regional activity center and have tried to be that going back some number of years, even to when the Kaiser facility was built and we became sort of a destination for healthcare. And certainly in more recent years with Harris Teeter and Target and Broad and Washington now coming online with Whole Foods and Aldi and West Falls, of course. So when you go to these regional meetings, we are perceived in Falls Church as a sort of miniature, but nonetheless a regional activity center, certainly a sub-regional activity center, which implies what we see here in terms of population. As you noted, we've substantially grown our population. So my question to you is, how do we make the case that increasing the city's population to maybe 20,000, which is a number that's would enable us to sustain our quality of services in schools, I think. How do we do that in a way that is environmentally responsible and environmentally responsive? And you pointed out part of it's buildings, but a huge part of it is transportation. And, as I see it at least, in the coming 10 years, we're going to have more traffic in Falls Church. We're building buildings that the people who live here will be able to walk to, and that's great. But many people are going to be coming into Falls Church from outside who never did before. And yet, regionally, we're doing, and even nationally and globally, we're doing our job by building amenities, restaurants, stores, services closer to the people who live here so that they can walk or short hop a car trip or take a bike or whatever. How do we make the argument that that is a reasonable thing to do environmentally?
It's 100% reasonable thing. In fact, it's morally, we have to do that to hit any of our goals. When someone lives in a neighborhood with mixed use housing, with commercial on the first floor and apartments above it that are well insulated, that are built to modern LEED standards, that have met the potential sustainable development it's when you have the ability to meet your daily needs and you don't need a car, your transportation emissions are basically nothing, right? And if you have a few people in single family homes that need to drive to meet their daily needs and are forced to have those kind of transportation emissions, when we live denser together and you can do those things without needing cars, without needing to burn as much fossil fuel, you use less, even if there's more people. And we've already seen that in the evidence. If we look at this, like Andy mentioned in his original report, yes, Falls Church population has been growing for years, but our emissions have also been going down, not at the rate that we'd like to see them, but it has been going down because we are making that progress. And if you look at it regionally, like you're saying, we are a regional hub for this. Every time somebody can't afford to live in Falls Church, can't afford to live in Arlington or closer to the city, and the closest place that they can afford to live and have a really great life is being pushed further and further back out, we rely more on automobiles, rely more on bigger, less well-insulated homes, and more of, middle Virginia forest lands get cut down. So it's, in terms of environmental impact of building dense neighborhoods, walkable neighborhoods, it's absolutely essential to meet any of our environmental goals. And I believe in 10 years, there's going to be barely any traffic in Falls Church, because why would you even drive? There's a bakery on a corner and a bodega over here, and you can meet your daily needs without that. There's a bus rapid transit on Broad Street, and we've passed, T-zones and increased the density in a whole bunch of ways that improve people's lives across the city. And I really think we're on the path there to hit those goals if we continue to act ambitiously and continue to take these seriously.
Thank you. And friends, that's why we put people with vision on boards and commissions, so that they can tell us what we need to be doing. Yeah, I think that's a great way to articulate it, and thanks very much for that. I just in closing, I'd love to say, I'm old enough to remember back in the 70s when, we had the gas shortage or whatever, and people bought gas on odd days or even days, depending on their license plate number. At any rate, it was a very rough way to enforce mobility restraints, basically. You tended not to drive on the days that you couldn't buy gas. In case you ran out of gas, you were out of luck. And I just would like to see us have a community conversation about, is it possible for there to be a day or an hour even where folks in Falls Church who live here don't actually drive their cars? I ask myself sometimes, why am I on the road in rush hour? Why am I here? I don't need to be. I'm not going downtown to work or anything like that. I should be home. I should be walking to things during that particular peak time, which would reduce emissions because you'd have less congestion. At any rate, as you go forward, I'd love to see us have a conversation about mobility. I don't want to say restraints because that has a negative connotation, but mobility adaptations that would help lead us to the promised land that Joseph outlined there. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Let me ask a quick question. So how does, I'm curious as to calculation of emissions, right? Because, for example, imagine everyone switches to electric cars. Sort of an externality, right? Like the energy plant maybe wherever, someplace else. How does all that come together, just out of curiosity?
So COG's got a pretty extensive process that they go through, and data collection and then calculations to come up with these figures. They've perfected or kind of perfected it. Maybe perfect's probably the wrong word, but they've evolved it since 2005. So and we've got them posted on the city's webpage, but there's a series of kind of charts that kind of outline the sources of emissions, for all sorts of things from, grid electricity to, natural gas and fuel oil usage in homes, on-road vehicle miles traveled. There's a bunch of different sources of information that they use consistently across all the jurisdictions, kind of in the Metro DC region, and that kicks out kind of a summary of where the emission, the emissions from those specific areas. And so it's depending on the source that we're talking about. They've got a different methodology to get to the calculation for each. So.
That would be taken into account, yes. 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 Yes, because also one of the major decreases, one of the largest reasons that it's decreased in the last several years is because the total grid in Virginia has become more green. So there's more solar plugged into the total grid. So the electricity being used by people in the city tends to be a higher percentage of it is from renewables. So that is part of the calculations.
But in that, we really don't have any control of, right? Whether
That's-
Dominion
right.
sources their wind farm off the coast, or whether it's a coal plant someplace.
I think other than advocating in Richmond to continue on the path of insisting that Dominion make those changes.
Yeah. Of course. Okay. Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, I just, I want to go back to, I think we need more work, because I think if you ask the average person in the neighborhood, is there more traffic? The answer is yes. So more people does bring more traffic. I appreciate that sometime in the future, that may not be the case, but right now it's the case. So I would challenge a couple of the comments made about that as being particularly a good way to go. But we could talk about it more. There's one other element here. COG on Wednesday is going to vote on joining a coalition regarding hydrogen. And it's kind of an interesting idea. The one thing I'm going to ask for is that the fire service be brought in, because hydrogen is highly flammable and downright explosive, and the infrastructure that you need for that could be a very intense investment in and of itself. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. Thanks.
Councilman Snyder, I would recommend not approving hydrogen to be used as fuel anywhere in Virginia. And based on quite a lot of research, there's absolutely no way to produce hydrogen such that burning it produces more energy than the production of it. So it's always a net negative for the grid. And that energy could have been used for just offsetting coal instead.
Okay, those are good points. I understand that natural gas is a principal way by which you create the hydrogen. So you're really not, yeah, you're getting water at the end of the tailpipe, but the problem is to get there. So those are good points, and I'll raise them. If you all could send me some information on that, I'll make sure it gets raised.
I would love to send you some of that information.
Perfect,
Thank
thanks.
Also information on the transportation of that, using up more fuel than you're saving.
Great.
That was VML. I watched a VML. I'll track it down for you.
Great. Really glad I raised it. That'll be really helpful. Thank you.
Letty?
I'll send around actually VDOT traffic data. I think Mr. Puentes was in the Planning Commission, actually wrote a really good op-ed in the New Press maybe back in 2022 that actually showed between 2007 to 2019, so excluding COVID numbers, that traffic volume actually decreased on our city roads. And it's VDOT data, so it's not city-produced data. So it kind of makes the case that while we've obviously increased population during those years, we did not actually increase car volume. People don't believe it, but it's real data. So I'll send that around as well.
All right. Well, listen, I think we've had a great discussion today. We look forward to seeing some of the output of these plans in the coming months, and look forward to further conversation with our friends on ESC. So thank you all for coming out this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Andy for putting together all of that report.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy. Mr. Young?
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on now to our next item, which is the East End Small Area Plan, Public Engagement Update. Mr. Shields, who's going to handle that? Looks like somebody on the television there.
So we do
Ms.
have
Bazemore?
Ms. Bazemore, who's going to give a briefing for the city council, and Mr. Stoddard is on the call as well. The purpose of tonight's discussion is not really so much on the content of the East End area plan, but rather next steps in our public engagement process. We've been engaged in this for many months now, and we're kind of in the middle of it. And we wanted to talk with the council about next steps. And so Ms. Bazemore, let me
Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge for some of the folks in the audience who may be interested, we did receive your emails. Folks on council have received your emails and are aware of the concerns about making sure that people in the Vietnamese community, business, residents, visitors, and the like, are heard and have an opportunity to fully understand what's going on, and an opportunity to offer input as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well, but just want to let you know we have received your email, and thank you for participating in the process. But Ms. Bazemore? You're on mute. Yep, there you go.
So, so, all right, give it a shot now, Ms. Bagemore.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, awesome. Nice to see everyone. Tonight, staff seeks to discuss with council the planned upcoming community engagement efforts for the East End Small Area Plan. These efforts will include additional engagement with the Eden Center businesses, customers, and visitors, and will include pop-up meetings I'm happy to share that will be at the Eden Center. Following the extended outreach period, staff expects to bring a revised draft East End Small Area Plan for review by Council and Planning Commission later this spring. Now, beginning on line 15 of the staff report, I want to provide some updates since the last City Council work session. The City Council last reviewed our draft Small Area Plan during its work session on September 27th, 2022. Since then, staff has conducted extensive public outreach, including engaging with the city advisory boards and commissions, hosting a second community meeting presenting the draft plan, hosting a pop-up at the farmers market, conducting an online survey, starting direct conversations with civic leaders in the Vietnamese American community, consulting with the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network, also known as SBAN, hosting a public listening session with the Planning Commission to receive direct public feedback on the draft plan. And we have also begun connecting with local nonprofit organizations and civic groups in advance of our extended outreach period. We actually had a call with the cool one today. On the next page, we'll start with line 30. What have we heard? Throughout this engagement process, community feedback has highlighted several priority desires for the East End. Beginning with a greater cultural focus to preserve Vietnamese culture. Participants at our various events and through the survey and through emails have encouraged a greater desire for a focus on celebrating and preserving Vietnamese culture. This is including and going beyond building preservation. Specific actions in support of this could include incorporation of a cultural overlay to the Eden Center area, recognizing the Eden Center Archway as a historic monument, rebranding the area as Little Saigon or Little Vietnam, renaming Wilson Boulevard as Saigon Boulevard, incorporating Vietnamese language onto street signs in the area, organizing a night market, and looking into successful examples of communities in places like San Jose, their Little Saigon or Little Vietnam, San Diego's Little Saigon, New York's Chinatowns, and San Francisco's Chinatown. We've also heard about small businesses versus nearby new development. So consistently, concern has been raised that new development in or near the Eden Center would affect the rent prices for current tenants. Staff has been in touch with professionals from SBAN. During these discussions, staff has explored solutions that could be incorporated into the plan to support small business owners. Many of these ideas are already included in the plan, specifically in the economic development chapter, but this section should be further reviewed and any needed follow-up activities should be identified. Number 3, our Eden Center community spans beyond the city boundaries. I think we see this a lot in our survey data. We received over 2,000 responses to the survey. Only a little over 340 people had that city zip code. So a lot of the engagement has spanned beyond the Falls Church community. So throughout the community engagement process, stakeholders living well beyond the city's boundaries have attended meetings. They've written in public comments expressing appreciation for the Eden Center and concerns about potential displacement and erasure. The volume and geographic reach of participants speak to the Eden Center being a beloved cultural center enjoyed by folks in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and beyond. Also, we saw that green spaces are appreciated. Throughout our engagement process, participants expressed positive responses regarding the inclusion of green spaces into the East End, as well as the inclusion of the nearby Oakwood Cemetery into the plan. Participants also expressed interest in better incorporating the adjacent green space that is the city's Fort Taylor Park. Number 5, pedestrian experience emphasis. Concerns regarding pedestrian experience in the East End have been raised throughout the engagement process. Unsafe conditions have been cited, including lack of crosswalks and overall lack of connectivity, particularly related to nearby transit options such as the Metro. The existing draft transportation chapter places significance and emphasis on better pedestrian, cycling, and transit connections, including more crossings and a network of slower speed streets that emphasize accessibility. And finally, affordable housing is a priority. From the beginning of the engagement process, going all the way back to community meeting number 1, there's been a concern for the preservation of nearby housing affordability in the event of development entering the area. This has been prevalent. The existing draft plan calls for the preservation of this existing housing, but going beyond what exists currently in the East End, the draft plan also calls for the introduction of housing into the POA. There's been consistent support and an emphasis from both the boards and commissions, as well as the public, to integrate affordable housing options into the East End as this use is introduced into the POA. Moving on to line 85, this is where we get into our expanded community engagement. So here we're looking to really better engage the Vietnamese community at the Eden Center. City staff is expanding beyond traditionally used meeting forums and formats. Traditionally, city staff has engaged the community by hosting community meetings, engaging the boards and commissions, running online and paper surveys, and hosting pop-ups at the farmers market. As evidenced in the survey responses, the Eden Center community extends well beyond the city's borders. Public engagement for this effort requires a more on-the-ground approach to ensure city staff is planning with the community versus for the community. So what we have in mind are pop-up events. Our team, the East End Small Area Planning Team, will host pop-up events at the Eden Center. During the pop-ups, staff hopes to engage with both the Eden Center tenants, but also the patrons. The intent is to organically engage with the community at the Eden Center through interactive visual boards with activities, anonymous comment cards, and informal discussions. All materials for these pop-up events will be available in English and Vietnamese, and an interpreter will accompany staff. Our timing. We're actually planning a series of pop-up events, which is very exciting, with each event running for about 1 week. So we hope to be out there once or twice each week. And each week we'll focus on the following themes. Week 1, what is your favorite thing about the Eden Center area? Notice we're not saying the East End, we're specifically saying the Eden Center area because we're really looking to engage with the Eden Center community at Eden Center. What does Eden Center mean to you is our next question for week number 1. Week number 2, we're looking to see what would you improve about the Eden Center area. Week number 3, we're looking into the future. What are your hopes for the future of the Eden Center area? And finally, week number 4, we really want to bring a revised vision statement to share with folks, and also concepts that might be compelling to the folks out at Eden Center. Based on discussions to date with stakeholders, staff plans to run the events in the afternoon. Following lunch, we heard at the listening session that 3 to 5 is a good time to be out there, but staff would like to go a little bit further and extend that to right after lunch to 5 p.m. We've heard that this is a time where there's significant foot traffic, and business owners are also most available during this time. Staff is also looking to incorporate a weekend event, so maybe that could be week number 1, where we're really envisioning and asking that question of what is your favorite thing about the Eden Center? What does Eden Center mean to you? That could be a really good pop-up to host on the weekend and get some good foot traffic and engagement then. So what are our methods that we plan on deploying at the pop-ups? We really want to have interactive vision boards. Each of these vision boards will focus on one of the themes above and allow for interactive engagement with participants. We think this will really mean a lot and maybe make folks more compelled to come over and engage. We're also looking for comment cards in a Dropbox. We'd like these comment cards to be available at the pop-up booth. These cards will allow participants to populate them with feedback at the booth or elsewhere. They could bring their comment cards to their shops or take them home and then return to our Dropbox. The comment cards shall be anonymous. Staff also recommends that the Dropbox remains at the site of the pop-up event and comments are collected once a week. Number 3, line 122, we're looking to do some door-to-door discussions. So staff plans to walk throughout the Eden Center, having smaller discussions with tenants and business owners. An interpreter shall accompany us. And finally, our translated FAQ. While at the pop-ups, and then also even before, we'd like to have our FAQ posted. We'd like to have it at the pop-up booth, but also on the message board. So really looking to share a bit about the plan. And this will be available in Vietnamese and English. Our FAQ states our planning email, so folks are able to email us with any comments or questions that they may have. Getting into advertising on line 129. So one thing that we would really like to do again is have our schedule of pop-ups available for the public on the message board at the Eden Center. Staff will also work to advertise our pop-ups through social media. We've heard a lot that the community is really active on Facebook. We have a couple of Facebook groups in mind that we're looking to connect with and get our pop-up schedule, our flyer out there once it's available. Also, always want to have our city webpage up to date with our pop-up events as well, so folks can stay engaged and come out. Looking also towards Vietnamese community groups to engage, to share our flyer with. And then recently, we've also talked about connecting with the radio station out at Eden Center to share the message as well. So line 134 discusses ongoing outreach and discussions with civic groups and NGOs. Staff is connected with or is coordinating to connect with the following civic and nonprofit groups to discuss our outreach efforts, tangible policies and strategies, Vietnamese community feedback, and contents of the draft plan. These discussions remain ongoing. The groups are professionals with the SBAN network. Again, SBAN is the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network, the Viet Place Collective, the HomK Center, Boat People USA, also known as BPSOS. We actually had a call with them today. We had a call with HomK, I believe last week. Also the CDVN HDD, which is the Vietnamese American Community of DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Also the National Organization for Vietnamese American Leadership of Greater Washington, DC, and the Vietnamese Resettlement Association. I would also like to add that we have a pending meeting with the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Development. This group, we were connected to this group through the HomK Center, through the director out there, Soo Kyung Oh. She was awesome, and following this work session, we'll get on it with scheduling that meeting. We're specifically going to be talking to the director of neighborhood strategies and kind of learning what has worked and what hasn't worked in communities across the country. So now I'm going to skip to page, I believe it is 13 of the staff report, to briefly go over again, what have we done since you guys last saw the plan in terms of community engagement. So we're going to skip over community meeting number 1, and we're going to go down to boards and commissions review. So the following boards and commissions reviewed the plan throughout the fall. You may have seen comment letters attached to the staff report, as well as a preliminary comment matrix. Staff has begun to organize that. Those boards and commissions were the Housing Commission, the Arts and Humanities Council, the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation, the Architectural Advisory Board, Urban Forestry Commission, Historic Commission, Human Services Advisory Council, the Historic Architecture Review Board, the Economic Development Authority, and the Environmental Sustainability Council. The following boards also received the draft plan and the recorded City Council work session for review. This was due to lack of a meeting or a full agenda. Those are the Rec and Parks Advisory Board and Library Board. The Chamber of Commerce and VPIS also reviewed the plan during fall of 2022. Going on to line 420, this was our pop-up. Back in October, we had a pop-up at the farmers market. Here we were sharing our vision statement and visual boards that are pictured below. They depict the vicinity map, conceptual images, and of course the proposed land use map. Here we were really looking to connect with folks and share these concepts that could be found in the plan, but also promote our second community meeting that happened back in November. In all, we talked to over 75 people at the farmers market. So those are some of the images. Those are some of my teammates on the right side of the screen connecting with some people at the farmers market. We did have an interactive activity at this event, and this is something that perhaps we could bring this specific one to the Eden Center as well. Moving on to line 432, we had yard signs out in the East End. So in an effort to be in the POA consistently, to have that presence, we put yard signs up, which hasn't been a traditional method of engagement for small area plans, but this is something that we wanted to do that was a little different. So we had them placed along public right-of-ways, as well as bus stops. There's a QR code that directs people passing by to our webpage, where the survey could be found, where the flyer for the community meeting could be found, and of course, the draft area plan. Our planning email is also included on this yard sign, so folks can send in comments. Again, we had another community meeting. This was back in November, mid-November, November 19th, very close to Thanksgiving. This is where we presented our draft plan to the community. We provided the plan, and we also had interpreters in English or Vietnamese and Spanish. We had the materials printed in all languages, including English. Following our presentation, we had breakout sessions where we discussed the different elements of the draft plan. We had a focus on vision, concepts, and goals, as well as urban design and environment, land use and zoning, and economic development, and then finally, transportation. Right below, you'll see a picture from our second community meeting. We also had a community survey. This ran from October to December. We had the survey published in Vietnamese, Spanish, and English. The survey asked the following questions below. I will not read them off because there's a lot. And again, the survey received approximately 2,000 responses in English and Vietnamese. We had a little over 30 responses in Vietnamese. And finally, I really want to highlight this. This was our public listening session beginning on line 481. So the public listening session was hosted by the Planning Commission on January 18th of 2023. This allowed for additional opportunity for the public to provide public comment to staff and the Planning Commission. The need for this additional communication or community engagement opportunity was identified following the second community meeting. Staff circulated a digital flyer as well as passed out hard copy flyers to businesses within the East End to promote the listening session. The flyer was published in both English and Vietnamese. The public listening session saw robust attendance, resulting in standing room only and City Council chambers. Staff gave a presentation similar to the one shared at the community meeting. And this presentation was translated to Vietnamese and available through hard copy. A Vietnamese language interpreter was also present for the event. In total, almost 20 people spoke before the Planning Commission, both in person and remotely. Feedback and recommendations received during the listening session include the following. Concern about cultural erasure and displacement at the Eden Center. There's a strong desire for preservation policies to be put into place, and preservation that goes beyond, again, the building structure, but looks at cultural preservation. Number two, recensoring the vision statement to reflect the celebration and preservation of Vietnamese culture. Number 3, lack of engagement with the community at the Eden Center. The city should go to Eden Center for a pop-up event to meet the tenants and the Eden Center community where they're at. Number 4, the city should consider hiring a Vietnamese-speaking outreach specialist. Linguistically relevant outreach must be done. Number 5, community buy-in of the plan is needed. The plan must be culturally responsive. Number 6, Eden Center needs commercial facade and overall building improvements. Poor air quality, safety concerns, and sewage issues were all cited at the listening session and beyond. Number 7, tenant rent issues are prevalent. Policies which better equip tenants should be considered in plan. Number 8, policies should be considered that recycle tax revenue generated by the Eden Center to support the Eden Center. Number 9, one speaker shared the following with the Planning Commission. When we want to help others, we want to ask how to help. During their work session, which followed the public listening session, the Planning Commission spoke in support of the timeline being adjusted to better engage the community at the Eden Center. One commissioner said the following: if businesses do not feel that the plan is reflective of them, then the plan is not done. And if you go right below to the next page, you will see our listening session in action. The next section is our FAQ. And this can be found online. This is what we are hoping to get printed alongside of our schedule and our flyer for the pop-ups. It does a good job of answering what the plan is. Why are we calling it the East End Small Area Plan versus the Eden Center Plan? What is a small area plan? What topics does the plan cover? Is it a redevelopment plan? What is the plan's purpose? What are the plans for Eden Center? How does this plan protect the business and cultural significance of the Eden Center? When did the planning effort start? And again, what are the next steps? I want to jump over to the last page, which is timing. So again, just knowing our various engagement efforts, but as well as our Planning Commission work sessions. The Planning Commission was involved throughout our drafting process. We would write a couple of chapters and take it to them, and they would comment, and we would fold in edits, and then we would bring forward more chapters. And then by work session number 3, before we came back to you guys, we had a complete plan. And yes, we were back at the City Council at the end of September. Following that, we began our boards and commissions review. That was extensive, going from October all the way down to November. We had our farmers market pop-up. We had our community meeting, an additional listening session. And of course, now we're looking to do more. We're looking to get our feet on the ground. We're looking to really take the plan to the Eden Center to have these pop-ups and to basically take that feedback and be able to revise the plan with the feedback that we're hearing. And that's all from me. I'm looking forward to our discussion tonight.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your fine work and that very thorough presentation. Mr. Shields, I don't know if you have anything to add. I know we've gotten a lot of emails from folks, maybe some of them in the audience tonight, about outreach, particularly in Vietnamese. Did you have anything to say maybe before we get started on discussion? Any thoughts you might have?
So thank you, Mayor, and Ms. Bazemore, thank you for that review of the outreach efforts so far, what we've heard so far, and our engagement plans going forward. Some of the specific requests from the community is to have an outreach specialist that is fluent in Vietnamese on city staff, and we're looking at that. We're considering that. We're also reaching out to entities that could help us immediately with this effort right now, just to make sure that in our engagement with community, that we're doing so in a way that's comfortable for all participants. And there are always opportunities for misunderstandings, and we want to minimize that. So that's right now we're looking at contractual services to help us with this outreach that we can use both with respect to public safety, because public safety is important to the Eden Center, and our police department works very closely with the Eden Center to make sure that both the business owners, visitors, shoppers feel safe there. But that's a relationship also that I think could benefit from outreach specialist services, whether it's a full-time employee or whether it's contracted services. We're looking into the best way to do that. So that's some initial feedback, and we look forward to engaging in this discussion a bit more internally, but also with community.
Gotcha. Thank you for that update. Also, maybe I could ask either you or Emily, is there any kind of schedule you have with respect to Eden Center? I've actually spoken with folks over there as well, and I'm glad to hear they're agreeable to folks coming on site. Do you have any kind of rough schedule when things might occur?
So we'd really like to be out there in March. That's what we're aiming for. Following this, we'll be drafting our flyer, preparing our visual boards, and then we have about a 1 to 2 week period to work with our translation companies to get things translated. So following this, we want to have some dates solidified to share with everyone. But March is what we're looking at. I had a call kind of discussing outreach today with an NGO, and we were talking about how March is cold. April's a little bit warmer, but I would like to stay with the March timeline.
And do you anticipate more than one event there, or is it just one that you're anticipating?
I would like to have more than one. I'd like to do a series of 4 where we really take the current, the visioning, and then going with the future, and then presenting revised vision statement and concepts. So maybe it could be chopped down to 3. I mean, we're open to suggestions, what people think would be most effective. But initially, I was thinking upwards of 3 and looking at 4.
Okay, that sounds good. And also, do you have any kind of mailing list or anything? There's some folks in the audience right now. Maybe is there any kind of list you have that people can get on, or how are things working with that?
Yeah, so we have emails, but we do not have a formalized mailing list. That would be something I'd love to get set up. I think it would be something that we would have to do through Civic. And have like internal discussion about that. But right now it's just our connections that we've made, and there's no formalized group through email.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to make sure we're exploring all possible avenues to make sure folks are fully informed and have the ability to offer input on this. Let's go around and get some questions or comments from folks. Ms. Hardy?
Great. Thank you, Emily. I appreciate the recap of kind of everything we've heard. I guess pausing there, anytime we kind of are trying to practice active listening, we always say, here's what we heard. Was this accurate or not? It sounds like you've kind of gone back out to all the various groups and a whole bunch of nonprofits, and so great job on that. Have we validated that we've captured everything from both the public comment emails we got and the listening session, that we understand what the concerns are?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And if we need to go back and review everything again, we're open to that. But I think like our big themes are captured in the beginning of the staff report, but there's also some lessons learned in terms of publishing things at the same time, not holding off on not holding off, but as soon as we have one thing available in English, maybe holding that until we get our translated materials also in Spanish and Vietnamese. Now we're looking obviously at Vietnamese, but that's a huge lesson learned, because I think we're always antsy to get information out there as soon as we can. But one thing we had heard about is, the flyer was released later, and that is because we had sent it off for translation, then we get it back and we send it out as soon as we have it. But I think to me that sticks out. But I do think we've done a good job of capturing what we've heard consistently throughout the process, whether it's that of cultural erasure, whether it's that of, home affordability in terms of like affordable housing. Yeah.
Okay. I guess on that note, so I like the 4-week plan that you've outlined. I'd also like to hear from the people we've heard from whether they think that plan is sufficient. In addition to the outreach specialist that Wyatt talked about, which I would support funding. I want to know whether they think that 4-week plan in March makes sense. Like it might be too cold, for example. They may say, oh, it's actually better to come out in April because that's when we have a bunch of community events there. So let's validate the plan with the people we've heard from as well to make sure that that makes sense for them. On that note about timing, you might have an error actually in your FAQ because it still talks about kind of a March action on the FAQ document that's posted. And so my general comment on this is let's take the time to get it right. I certainly don't see a rush to kind of move through all the engagement process. Let's do it right. Let's make sure we've really heard from them. Let's make sure we validate and we are reflecting what we've heard. So it doesn't need to be March, in my opinion, in terms of action, I think, right now. I think that's what you posted on the FAQ document, Emily. Separate from all the planning, I sat in on most of the listening session. I heard from a lot of the folks, and some of them in the audience today, concerns that are outside of the small area planning. And so I wanted to understand from city staff, what role do we have? And so concerns around building conditions, public safety concerns, maintenance issues, especially in the face of high rent. Does the city have a role in our building safety office, economic development office to really help look out for kind of tenants' rights here in this case? And what can we do to support that community separate from all the small area planning that we're talking about?
Absolutely. And I think that this is not an effort that's sort of isolated to one department. This is a full discussion with the full city and with community. So I think there's a lot of things to follow up on. The city does have a process for our larger shopping centers, not just the Eden Center, but all of our shopping centers to have a full code review where kind of all of the, whether it's health, building safety, kind of get everybody in together to do a walk through the building and look for safety issues and other maintenance code issues together. That is something we do at the Eden Center. But we can, when we engage in this process that Ms. Bazemore has described, I think we'll hear more about that. We'll learn through this engagement process, and we may do things differently going forward.
Yeah, and that's why I think that outreach specialist could be helpful, right? Because some of it is also building and earning trust with that community to hear about those issues. Right. It's kind of scary to talk about, your maintenance issues because you're worried that you might get in trouble with your landlord, right? And so that's why I think that there's value in that side of it too. It's not just small area planning, but I think understanding current day issues and how the city can help protect tenants here. So thank you for the work on this.
Okay, Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, two quick questions. The tax generation has been talked about, and yet I've been told that a lot of the businesses are cash only. So I wonder if our city constitutional officers could take a look at whether we're capturing all the potential tax revenue. Also, from time to time, there have been crimes committed up there, and I'm wondering what the community is willing to recommend in terms of reducing crime beyond just policing. I think some of the problematic businesses in the past have moved on. That's good, but we just had a violent crime up there recently. So what's the community willing to do to help us?
Well, I think with all public safety, it always starts with community. The police are there as an ally. And so I think that's the approach that we want to take with the Eden Center is how we can work effectively together so that the businesses are safe, the customers are safe, and it's, I think that's the spirit of those ongoing discussions.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Connolly?
Ms. Bazemore, I want to say thank you for the work that you put into this. I think your description of the comments, particularly at the community meeting, were really good and did a nice job of summarizing everything that was happening in that meeting. I'm also looking back to find the numbers, but I appreciate that as you talk about engagement, you mentioned a number of different groups that have the ability to reach out to businesses in the community in Vietnamese, also to share their own experiences. I think one of the most important things is that, as you mentioned in your report, the reach of Eden Center is not just people who live in the city of Falls Church, and that is an area of economic development that I feel like we have not parsed out really well either. That it exists and Eden Center is there, but we haven't really looked at it as how can we expand the economic development that's happening in that center by bringing people into the city of Falls Church. How can we celebrate that and expand that? So I feel like that is another, and again, I don't know that that fits exactly into the area plan, but it's more of an economic development thing. So when you mentioned having an interpreter at all of these events, and I think an interpreter is important, but an interpreter only interprets what's being said. And I do think someone who has more responsibility as an outreach person to be able to explain what's going on, to gain trust, as Ms. Hardy just said, is very important to be able to work closely with people to really improve those conditions. So Mr. Snyder just mentioned the Commissioner of Revenue and the Treasurer's Office, and that would just be another opportunity to make sure that the kinds of outreach that's happening at the Chamber of Commerce with the Commissioner of Revenue, the Treasurer, is also happening at Eden Center. So I do want to make sure that as you are doing outreach, you're working, especially with the people from the Viet Place Collective. I think some of them are here tonight watching, but they have parents and others that are business owners and are able to really hear from people who've been there a long time, who really represent the core and the heart of Eden Center. So I think that's very important. But I would definitely support taking a bigger look at how we are including people from Eden Center on the Arts and Humanities Council, for example, or the Economic Development Authority, or even the Environmental Sustainability Committee. I mean, all of those groups should represent the whole city, and at the moment, they don't. So thank you for this, and I am looking forward to seeing the results and participating in some of this engagement as you go forward.
All right, thank you very much. And unless we have any other comments, let's wrap this conversation up. But we do, again, want to hear from everyone who has an interest in this plan going forward. And what we, are committed to reaching out in ways that will allow everyone to both understand what's being contemplated and offer constructive input. So look forward to the further outreach you're going to do. Okay.
Emily, can you include the Planning Commission and the City Council on these pop-ups, your 4-week plan? Because I think that'd be beneficial for all of us to actually just be there in person too and join you. I mean, there's good eating to be had, which I know the mayor would be fan of.
Yeah, I would love to do that. We were, we've been brainstorming, our pop-up ideas and having discussions with folks, including Viet Place Collective. We had a brief call with them, I believe, last week, and we were kind of brainstorming this idea of liaisons. So it'd be nice to have our planning commissioners or council members out there with us for a few. And we've begun to do lunch out at Eden Center. So if anyone would like to join us before one of the pop-ups, we could all do lunch sometime. That would be super fun.
That sounds great. I'm going there tomorrow. So, Ms. Connolly? Okay. All right. Again, thank you all. Look forward to hearing more from everyone and appreciate your efforts, Ms. Bazemore. Let's go ahead and move on to our next item. Mr. Shields, our outdoor dining. Who's handling that?
So Laura Arsenault is our lead staff planner for this effort, and we have made some changes to the proposal that is before the City Council. We're trying to streamline it, but also focus it more specifically on facilitating outdoor dining and facilitating the continuation of some of the positive things that we've seen with the move to outdoor dining, during the pandemic. So, Ms. Arsenault, I'll turn it over to you. I will just note that we also have the City Attorney, Mr. Brian Lupkeman, is on the call. Thank you for joining, and Mr. Stoddard still is on the call as well. So, Ms. Arsenault, let me turn it over to you to walk us through the proposal as it has been amended.
Great, thank you, Mr. Shields. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. My name is Laura Arsenault, and I'm a principal planner with Planning and Zoning. I'm here tonight to present on updates to outdoor dining and the proposed zoning ordinance amendment and seek council review and feedback. Staff is also requesting guidance on scheduling the first reading for next week on Monday, February 13th, 2023. Staff last presented to council on this issue on January 9th, 2023. Starting with line 12 in the report, we started incorporating council feedback and review, and staff updated their recommendations for the zoning ordinance and a new outdoor dining permit process. Then moving very quickly to line 160 of the report, I'll go through the changes that we have recommended now. Staff is continuing to recommend a creation for the outdoor dining use, which is in line 160. It talks about a use associated with an existing restaurant area. Staff is also updating references to the new outdoor dining use section throughout the zoning ordinance, starting in line 168. That will be done in accessory use sections of the commercial districts, commercially zoned districts, and also in off-street parking requirements. And that has not changed since earlier. But now we have some new supplementary regulations for outdoor dining, starting in line 182. We're proposing, as we proposed last time in front of you all, zoning administrator permit approval. And I'll talk about that process a little bit more in a minute. We're also requesting zoning administrator inspections, as well as the zoning administrator authority to modify required parking. The zoning administrator can add conditions to the outdoor dining approval, and we also added a revocation standard as was requested in the last meeting. Starting with the new permit process for outdoor dining, and I'm sorry, Sophie, I'm making you go all over the place, but I would just give an overview of that really quickly, as it didn't go into too much detail in this report. It's very similar to what we had talked about last time. Staff looked at removing the permit use. However, we realized that the same submission requirements would be needed to make an adequate analysis by staff, the zoning administrator, and building safety. So staff is still requesting a submission form and materials. And Sophie, I'm sorry, it's on line 182 if you're looking for it. I apologize. We're looking for a submission of a one-page form and materials, which would include a dining layout, a certificate of occupancy, and other materials as needed. And that would help both the zoning administrator and building safety analyze the permit. As I mentioned, this would be an administrative permit by the zoning administrator. There'd be no public hearings for this unless needed. There would be review by building safety, who would coordinate on the zoning administrator, and zoning would work with the applicant on submission requirements. And for existing outdoor dining uses, staff will work with them on their applications to update their permits. In short and sweet tonight, tentative timing moving forward. We're looking for a first reading tentatively next week, which is the 13th of February. We have tentative planning commissions meetings, a work session on March 1st, and a public hearing on March 15th, and then looking potentially for a city council second reading on March 27th, which coincidentally is the same date that the COVID zoning measures expire. Other updates since the last meeting is staff has begun outreach with existing restaurants with outdoor dining approvals, as well as coordination with the Economic Development Office. And that is pretty much it. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. And since we do have the city attorney on the call, might I ask whether you've reviewed these materials and they're agreeable to you from a legal perspective?
Yes, Mr. Mayor and members of council, and happy to be here this evening. I've spent some time with staff. I've been through this. We've made some suggestions, worked with them on the language, and any minor issues that need to be cleaned up before first reading next week, we'll of course take care of. But yes, this passes legal muster.
All right, thank you very much. So let's go ahead and open it up to questions or comments from anyone on council. Anyone, Mr. Snyder?
Thanks very much. I appreciate the movement toward a more flexible and rapid approval, particularly when there haven't been complaints to those who have made the changes. So I think that's a movement in the right direction. But we've gone from too prescriptive to, it's not clear to me. I'm reading section 48-1239, and there's a lot of talk about parking. But a lot of the other processes and standards don't seem to be listed here. So maybe explain to me, are they incorporated by reference, and can we be clearer about that? So maybe you could tell me more about what are the standards and how would the zoning administrator go about her business?
So with the outdoor dining, as you have it before us, this is purely a zoning review for outdoor dining. So this does not, it has building safety aspects kind of built in with it, but this is just a zoning change. So items such as tents, and items, I apologize, I didn't go through this in the report because it was a duplicate from last time, but tents and ADA access and that type of thing are not regulated by the zoning ordinance, they're regulated by building code. So that would be a completely separate department reviewing those specific aspects. Zoning only has purview over the parking piece.
So, is there any change from what we saw before then? It seems to me we're only addressing the zoning, and if the process is as cumbersome as it was before, then we haven't made an improvement. I'm just trying to figure out what are the standards. If I'm a business person, how do I go about this, and what are the standards that are going to apply to me?
Sure. So from a zoning perspective, as I mentioned, the only standard that we would be reviewing is parking and appropriability of the use on the site. Building safety would take care of the other state and federal code requirements. For health and safety, that would usually be enforced with any use on the site. But as far as process goes, we are, it would be no different than what they would have to submit for a building safety review. They'd have to submit a seating plan, show where the seats are located, ADA access and those things. So most of the information we're requesting, a lot of the businesses should already have on hand in doing normal business operations.
Okay, is this anywhere clear to people? Like, are there going to be instructions provided, or this is the process? Because it looks like we're not enacting the process, but rather we're assuming it's going to go forward. So it's important to understand, well, what is the process? What are the standards?
Understood. We have, with the last work session we had, we've kind of changed directions a little bit in the intermediary and then gone back to where we were before. So the last time I came to you with an application form and some submission requirements, and that will be much more clear in the report next week to you for first reading. But that process has not changed with a one-page application form and a number of submission items that need to be sent to the zoning administrator, but also building safety for review.
Okay, I guess the big thing for me is, the big thing for me is if you're operating and you haven't had complaints, there ought to be a fairly streamlined process for you.
That's correct. We will be working with each of the existing uses that are out there now to try to facilitate and update the permits as appropriate. We're just kind of putting a permit to the use that's out there now and making sure it's meets health and safety concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. So to clarify and kind of building off Mr. Snyder's questions, do people submit two sets of things? One to the zoning administrator for the outdoor dining permission and then one to building safety, or is there one point of entry in the process? And the reason I'm kind of sticking on this point is I want to make sure it's easy to navigate for people.
Yes, we're proposing that there would be a submission similar to a sign permit now. It would be submitted to our permits office and then be routed to building safety and zoning for review. So that process is already happening with sign permits, and we would just adopt that. But it would be one submission for both reviews.
Got it. Perfect. Second clarifying point. Are we asking existing businesses with outdoor dining that was approved during COVID to go through that process to resubmit everything? Or do they get grandfathered in somehow?
We're going to work with them each individually, and we're not going to ask them to go through the process, but we are going to ask them to look at their certificates of occupancy to make sure they're accurate and that they meet kind of what they proposed to us before with their outdoor dining plan. So yes, there will probably be some updating, but there's about 13 applications in now, so we've committed, and I've talked with building safety about this, to working with them each individually to kind of administratively go through that process.
Great.
Not have them submit a formal package.
Thank you. I think one of the benefits in a small city is we know all these restaurants that are operating, and so hopefully we can have that personal touch and not people do extra paperwork for no reason. So thank you for that. Third one, is the process still free? Because I did look at kind of what Vienna was doing in Arlington, and I think Vienna charged kind of a high fee, I think, in my opinion, like $1,500 to get through the process. And so hopefully we're not creating that sort of barrier for our businesses.
No, at this time, we're not proposing any fee, and I don't think there's any impetus to propose one. The other ones are going through public hearings, and so I think that's why there's a little bit more fee associated with those. But just to be clear, no fee proposed with this.
Great. And then a question for kind of the city attorney and staff. So I know with this new approach, we are essentially taking the parking stuff separate and then essentially empowering the zoning administrator to relax parking requirements on a case-by-case basis. And obviously context matters. And so I understand why we're doing this, because there's some, locations of these commercial properties where there's tons of overflow, street parking where you can relax it, and other places where you don't have that. But now that it's more subjective, is that a concern from a legal perspective? Should there be standards that we're kind of holding people against rather than just kind of leave it up to the zoning administrator to decide on a case-by-case basis?
So I think from staff's perspective, the short answer to your question is that it's legal. I think from staff's perspective, I think the thought is that the process, it will be kind of a case-by-case basis, as Laura noted, but the thinking is, especially with businesses that have done this before, that the zoning administrator in consultation with the other departments will be able to determine where it makes sense and where it doesn't to waive. It's not really eliminating parking requirements, but a case-by-case waiver of parking. So I think from a staff perspective, I think we're satisfied. From a legal perspective, I'm fine with it.
And that is within the authority of what a zoning administrator could do?
Correct.
Okay. So while we're on parking, I guess when we talked about the last version of this, I was ready to have the discussion about what commercial parking requirements would look like, because I do think it's an opportunity to make sure that those are not a barrier to new economic development. I think Paul Stoddard told us that, we've had some businesses go elsewhere because our parking requirements are too high. And so I thought this was a great opportunity to relook at that. And so while we're not tackling it here, and I'm disappointed we're not tackling it here, I do want to make sure we put a pin in that and perhaps empower the Planning Commission to take a look at our commercial parking requirements. I think it's on our work plan. I think it's likely on their work plan as well. And while it may be out, sometime in 2023, I think this is clearly an opportunity for us to figure out, maybe separate from outdoor dining, is what are the right commercial parking requirements we have in the city. That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Leon?
Thanks, Emily. Can you help me understand what's the policy on renewals? So somebody gets approved, as long as they pass inspections, do they get to keep the permit, or are we asking folks to renew it every year, or at some cycle that's fixed?
At this point, we're proposing a one-time application form, and then it operates until there's an inspection issue or a complaint that's raised to us. So we've decided to defer to a complaint-only system instead of doing a biannual inspection, which I think was proposed last time.
Okay, that's good. Can you specify specifically? I think I'd love to see the specifics on when the community engagement with existing businesses is actually going to happen in this February to March timeline that is on lines 245 to 249. Since it's not there, can you verbalize what the plan is?
Sure. Myself, along with some building safety staff, have already begun the outreach. There are about I want to say 13 outdoor dining applications that came in from May 2020, and about 9 of them were approved and still existing. So we've already began outreach and phone calls to each of those existing businesses. We're working with the economic, I'm sorry, is there a comment? Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Still listening.
Thank you. There is also some outreach with some colleagues in the Economic Development Office, and we're putting together a one-page flyer for distribution and information about this process and the zoning ordinance updates, so that we're trying to reach a larger audience than just the 9 that we have existing. We were planning to hold some public meetings, but we wanted to get a little further in the process before we started and get possibly past the first reading before we started doing that specific outreach about what we're doing.
So you're planning, you started it, but you're planning on expanding it.
Correct.
With the intention to include the expansion of additional folks to get all that input in so that it feeds Planning Commission on March 1st? Like, I'm trying to,
Sure.
it's got to go
Yeah.
somewhere. Ideally,
Right.
it's helpful, right, that
Right.
is documented and brought forth, into the Planning Commission. If not, really honestly, by February 15th, that might be a little much, because I
Sure.
know it's already, 6th. But by March 1st, I think it would be really helpful. Is that feasible to do, to plan?
At this point, our kind of main method would be either to have a public meeting in the next couple of weeks, obviously, or to do kind of an email blast through the Chamber of Commerce to gain interest and input, because it's only affecting a select amount of people, but a larger audience than we realized. We want all restaurants to be aware of what they could do if they wanted outdoor dining. At this point, I don't think we have large public community meetings scheduled, but that's something we can look into because we have such a specific population.
Yeah. So I think for, just think about what you're saying there. You're saying, oh, I don't have a big population, right? So I'm thinking it shouldn't be hard to get at it. I think what's really key in the outcome that is helpful here that I'm striving for is let's see it in writing, right? And let's make sure that it's included into the feedback, right, for how you structure Section 48-1239.
Agreed. I think I think your point is well taken. There's two pieces we're working on here, right? Is we have the zoning code and also the changes to the zoning code and also a process creation. So I'm aware of that and happy to kind of take the process, I think, which is what the community would be more interested in necessarily than the zoning code wording specifically. But point taken, and
Yeah.
we'll look into.
Thank you. Ease of use that, supports the objective, right? While also not sacrificing safety, right, while we're doing this. We just, I think we all understand that we don't want to make sure we create a process that, is difficult to manage on the staff side too.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think you've done a fine job here in kind of threading the needle of making sure that it's simple and straightforward, but also not totally Wild West. So I think you and the city attorney have done a very nice job in crafting this. So I'm supportive. Any other comments anyone has?
Mayor, if I could just mention, there is one other issue that's not in this ordinance, and it relates to the use of public right-of-way. Along Broad Street, we have restaurants that use the sidewalk for restaurants, and in discussion with the city attorney, we think we need to develop some procedures for the city council to approve uses of public land for restaurant uses. It's something we've been pretty laissez-faire about in the city's history, and the city attorney has alerted me to some concerns about that just from a legal perspective and from a Virginia Constitution perspective. But he also has some solutions that he's applied in other jurisdictions. So that'll be a discussion that will follow on the heels of the good work that Laura's done here. But there is probably a chapter 2 to this on the much smaller population of restaurants that use city public right-of-way.
Okay, we'll look forward to hearing that. Again, thank you all. Fine work you've done to date. Let's move on to our next item, and then let's take a break after that, maybe. Next up is work plan briefing on the community serve.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Pleased to be bringing you this update. It is a council work plan item, as we've noted in line 13. What we're looking for this evening is council input on sort of the scheduling and timing of when to do this survey. Right now, we're proposing to do that this spring and wrap up the results and bring it back to you early summer. And then you could have that for budget planning, strategic planning, your next work plan effort. The alternative would be to wait till late fall and then do it then. changes the outcome and the utilization. So we wanted to make sure that we sought your input on that. And we're looking to solicit your input on the core question topics and any kind of special areas that we want to focus on as we work with the vendor. So to give you a little overview of the process and how we reached this point of recommendation, we have established a steering committee that included staff from CPEDS, Emily Bazemore, library director Jenny, since she just recently did strategic planning and community survey work, and then of course our communications office, so Susan Finarelli. We interviewed 4 firms. One turned out to not decline. They would just work as a sub with one of the others. So we did a deep dive on 3. We've interviewed them and solicited formal proposals. The one that we're recommending to utilize, which would be under the city manager's approval because of the dollar amount for procurement, but we wanted to get input, is Probowski Research. This firm currently works with Arlington, City of Hampton, as 2 Virginia localities, and numerous others. They provided a nice blend of same things other localities did, but they were able to tailor and felt like the concierge little city piece a little bit more, where they could tailor the questions for us and be more hands-on with us as we worked with the community. So we would recommend working with this firm, doing a multi-year contract with them, because the most important thing with benchmarking and analysis is to repeat it so we can see if we're making progress or not in some of the areas that were identified. And they also do employee surveys and targeted surveys. So with this firm, we could do the community survey, and the next year, let's say, do the employee survey, and then either repeat the community survey or do a targeted. A targeted one is one, let's say if you wanted to do something targeted to public safety, and how are we doing with public safety, social justice and so forth, or Parks Master Plan type things, so we could target some services. All firms provided randomizations, good targeted strategies to make sure we cover all areas of the city, geographically, income, gender, so forth. So they're all very similar in that arena. Probowski, as I mentioned, just tended to be very responsive, have good on-site staff with DEI and social workers, and could do standardization, but also benchmark within the city. So you can see on line 19 some of their history. They have a long duration, a lot of local government and private sector work. They really work to help identify satisfaction levels of the service, but also to prioritization. So it's good to know somebody's really happy with Rex and Park, but maybe they think public safety is very important. And even though they're satisfied, it's still important, and it helps target then where resources and investments would go. At line 37, after the list of some of the other localities that are similar to this city that they worked with, even if they're not in Virginia, you'll see that we've looked at a plus or minus 5% error rate, and that results in 300 random selection of city residents. And I just noted to give some context that City of Hampton did 400, and Arlington was 1,200 to get that same plus or minus 5%. The modes for reaching out to folks is through emails, calls, texts, phones. One of the things that we liked with this firm is they do still do phone and can have interpreters on the phone call if needed. So it was just a little more adaptability for accessibility, and we can do Spanish, Vietnamese, and English in the proposal, but they have other language opportunities. When doing this community survey, the target is to try to have a 15-minute survey so people actually will answer it, and so we have some good information. The Hampton survey that's attached as a sample was about 15-20 minutes. Arlington almost took 30 minutes, but that was Arlington's choice. You got, huh? Yeah, he did. So it's just a matter of, most firms don't. I would be out. Most firms do not recommend that, nor does Probowski, but we want to make sure we get the right questions. And I think there's a way to hit that happy medium. Yeah, but yeah, it could be self-selection, and we don't want that. And what we liked about this firm is they'll look at the responses, which are fully confidential, anonymous. We will not know who responds, but they will map it. And if in our city we're getting responses only from a certain neighborhood or a certain age bracket or ethnic or race background, they'll flag it and do targeted outreach to make sure that we get a good statistical response. In line 51 of the staff report, I provided some samples of sort of the functional areas that they can ask questions for. These I pulled from Hamptons, but they're looking at things that are similar to council's vision and values, maybe slightly different wording, and we would use ours, but economic development, placemaking, living with water was their flooding and stormwater, safe and clean community is their public safety, quality of life. So you ask some questions in those arenas, and then you also ask specific satisfaction to the services that the city are providing. So it could be around libraries or police, cycling. And this is where you might tailor a little bit. Some localities will have water, we won't. We have sewer or stormwater, so you would tweak it to what our services are, but the core questions still have some standardization. So they can benchmark to their regional and national database, and then also we could use them to truth test us on multiple years as we repeat this. But we can add some tailored questions that are just something that council would like to hear about, and so that's where some input this evening would be helpful. Within the staff report, did provide you some links so you could see samples reports on how it's presented. In the staff report, we provided the sample survey for Arlington and Hampton. Kowalski Research also provides a nice dashboard, so we can have this for internal staff, so that as we're working on budget developments in our own departmental work plans that are consistent with council, we can see where pluses and minuses are for adapting, but it also can be used externally for the community, and so you can actually change some of the search patterns if you wanted to see a certain age or race or income or neighborhood. So that dashboard was a very nice resource. And the funding for this can be covered within the FY23 budget and the recent budget amendment targeting this item. And then on line 99, just kind of put out a proposal for a schedule in a repetitive pattern where the first survey would be community survey this spring, summer. And then we do recommend using this firm and the same firm for some continuity and consistency for the employee survey, which internally we strongly recommend. We've done employee surveys, but they've been in-house developed, SurveyMonkey, not confidential, and you can unintentionally put some biases in. And this firm does employee surveys as they do community surveys. And then right now the proposal is to recommend every other year alternating that. And then at the end of the 4-year period, see if we stay every other year, maybe take it to 1 to 3 year, just so we can see give time for changes in between, but also to see people getting used to responding to surveys depending on how long they are. This firm also can do the targeted surveys, as I mentioned, and right now within the budget and the contracting authority, even if we pick one of those, we're still good, so it would be under city manager approval for the contract, and we're procuring. So with that, that's a high-level overview of the great teamwork, which I appreciate for the interviews with the 3 firms. So timing and sort of a focus area of questions and specific targets of areas that you would like to question, and we can work on developing a tool.
All right. What do people think? Should we do a survey? Ms. Hiscott?
I need 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Only if it's 119 questions. I only have 118 for you, Cindy, so
No problem.
29 minutes. I think I would defer to you and staff in terms of your workload and ability to, I mean, you've seen what's out there, you've seen how much work it takes. Is it doable for, I assume that you're taking the lead on this, and does it fit in a spring? The sooner the better, in my opinion, but does it give you enough time to fully vet all the questions and put it together in the way that you think is most effective? So I think I would defer to you on the timing. If you say you can do spring, I'm all for moving forward with it. One area I know I'm interested in learning from the community is, we've talked about it before, is how people get their information, because, you know, there are many times that we think that we've communicated well and we find out, you know, a year into the process that 600 people come back and comment on something, and clearly we missed an opportunity to get the information out to this at the beginning effectively. So, you know, and then when you come in and staff says, well, we did, you know, 1 through 50 things, 1 through 50 didn't work. You know, what do we do? How do we get to people? I'm really interested in getting more information on how people learn about what happens in Falls Church City. And that then goes across all of these services, right? And then I'm also interested in ensuring that kind of what people care about, not just whether the trash is picked up and their leaves are picked up, but, you know, if we're going to hit this 50% reduction in greenhouse gases, that's going to mean that people are going to have to drive fewer miles and compost more or do whatever, you know. So are we being realistic in our expectations of engaging our community? So in the survey, can you get information on how interested people are in actually doing the work? How interested people are in actually, you know, if there's affordable housing that's built right next to them, how, you know, how willing are they to be flexible on those kinds of things? So not just service levels, but signal markers, value markers, I guess, as well. Does that make sense? I only had 4 questions. Y'all save the other 100.
All right. Who else got a question? Ms. Hardy?
You know, I will make up for that. So like Debbie, as soon as possible would be great. I'll leave it up to the consultant and staff on like best practices. Like maybe the middle of summer is not a great time to do it because maybe people are on vacation and they're hard to reach. So if we can get it done in the spring, I think that's great. I love that we're also doing an employee one as well, especially through the firm. Broad question. I did read the Arlington executive summary, the deck they had on their website, and I thought it was very actionable and it was good. So if that came from this consultant and it was a result of their 119 questions, clearly we don't need to shoot for 119, but I did think the executive summary was very useful and helpful. So I do like the output that came out of this. But ultimately, I think when we think about why are we doing it, it's to drive priorities in our work plan and budget allocations, right? And so let's make sure that we sync this up with those processes so we don't just have, hey, here's survey results and we just sit them on the shelf. Let's tie it into work plan development for the coming year in the budget. So that's the first comment. Second, I know that they're doing obviously representative outreach to residents. How do we tackle business owners? Like they don't vote, but clearly they should have a say in the community, right? Do we target them as well? Can they be included?
The way the community survey is set up and the other localities, and Beth, it's your residents, it's your voters. But with the targeted survey option, you could do a business one, and this company has actually done it where it's business/economic development. But it'd be separate from the community survey.
Okay. I guess I'd be interested in figuring out how to do that because I want to make sure we get that voice in terms of our priorities as well.
One of the things from sort of a workload process one could do is on the second year when you're doing the employee survey, you could do a targeted business survey. Because neither of those are randomization. You're trying to get 100% of the population targets. Okay. So you could
do in the off years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so since Arlington's their only client locally, for benchmarking purposes, I saw that they just had a general category of like Mid-Atlantic, and this is in the Arlington executive summary. Do they have any other clients in our immediate region that we'd be able to benchmark with?
They don't, but we specifically talked to them, and they will benchmark to other localities in the region even if they're not doing that locality. So, for example, we know City of Alexandria and Vienna and Loudoun are using a different firm, which we also interviewed. And the second one, but not quite number one, they will use their data because it's published, it's on the website, so they can
So even those
do a
apples and oranges, they
cross-check
can still
and
do it.
they'll parallel to the core benchmarking. If it's any of our really tailored things, then they won't benchmark, but the core functions, they can. The questions are all pretty similar. So
Okay.
they will pick that. So if there's specific areas besides just NOVA,
Okay.
generally you'd like benchmarking to do that.
So on the tailoring point, I'll plus one Debbie's request on how people get information about civic news. I think that's really important, especially as the environment clearly changes on how people consume information and news. The second, I think, piece of information that'd be useful is working from home data. And so I know that there are some national data around like percentage of people working from home. I think DC is still one of the laggard metropolitan areas with less than 50% on average with people working from home. But as we think about meeting the needs of our residents who may not be commuting to work 4 days of the week, where they live is also where they work, and thinking about city services, economic development activities, all that, transportation, all of it, I think could be influenced by some working from home data, and especially if we can measure it at a local level, I think that would be really useful. 3 policy areas that I know that this council has paid a lot of attention to that I want to make sure we get some tailored questions on is, one is baseline kind of multimodal use. So today, what percentage of people get around by single occupancy vehicle, bike, ped, and then I'll leave it to the survey experts to figure out, is it percentage of time that we ask them and just self-report, and then what they would like to get to and what are the barriers to get to those desired modes of transportation. Second area is economic development. I think we should probably pulse check how people feel about having all these great new options to walk and bike too. What else they'd like to see in the community. And then the third is around housing needs. I think we've seen that we have a housing supply shortage in certain types of housing, but I think that would be another important area to hear from the community about, of where we have housing opportunities besides affordability, but also housing diversity. Thank you.
Thanks. When we get these results, do they meet this sort of scientific standards like Gallup polls and others? They can tell you within 3 or 4% what the overall community's view on things are.
Yeah, for the community surveys, it seems that it's a plus or 5% error rate from the 3 firms, and so the proposal before you would reach that point.
Okay, so that's important to me because I want to look at a survey that's scientifically valid. It meets all the necessary standards. Also, I'd like to try to avoid "are you happy or unhappy" type questions, but rather, and I agree with Councilmember Hardy, I'd like to bore down more on these issues. Transportation, for example, what mode do you use for what purpose, and then what improvements would you like to see? So some of these are not necessarily simply one question at a very high level, but rather to make it really useful, we need to bore down. You could say, in the housing area, you could say, oh yeah, we should have more affordable housing. Well, how? So, what I'm hearing is people really want this to be useful for policy making, and so it's a real challenge. But I look at a lot of these questions, like Arlington and the others, are so high level that it's like, yeah. So hopefully we can get more focused.
And I think that's why our recommendation is this firm, because they seem to be able to tailor it a little bit more for the local needs, and then you benchmark against yourself over 2 years. But if you get too detailed, then you can't do some of that benchmarking against the region or Mid-Atlantic. So it's a balance, and that's why I like the targeted survey approach. So the first one could be business, but if council wanted to do a deeper dive on transportation or affordable housing, we can use this firm to do that. Andy and I were talking about, if the timing is for spring, which is our recommendation, we could put some energy and environmental questions in there too, just as another input to the planning process.
I mean, I would say, just real quick, I would say there's a trade-off also about like asking everything under the sun and getting, statistically significant responses, because when you get to 30 minutes, Phil's hanging up. And so I think we do need to be, well, maybe not, Phil's the one. So I think we do need to be a little cognizant of kind of the trade-off of getting useful information, but not trying to get so much that people don't participate, or only a skewed portion of the population does. But Ms. Connolly, you had a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Nestor. I have a couple of questions. Again, not 118, but a few. When they're saying they want to get responses from 300 people, how many people do they have to contact to get 300 people?
So they randomly select the 300.
Right.
And
then they go after those 300
So you don't
persistently?
change your randomization, you stick to that same 3. So they'll use the additional modes to call, to text, email. We'll have some stuff on
Bug the hell out of
the
them
flyer.
until they surrender.
And where are they getting those contact lists of how are they going to find me to call me up?
So we start with sort of the census data, because you can pull the addresses out for residents, and then we geocoded and cross-check to make sure they're actually in the city. So, we drilled down. This company has a lot of good methodology around that. And that's why it's also residents, because then we target that and you have to do businesses separate. And then they map it. Now, one of the things they'll also do for us is normally for localities, they look at the census block. You got to drill down a little lower for the City of Falls Church. So if they want, we can use the voting wards, we can use the leaf pickup and snow wards. So they'll look and make sure, are we getting enough, the random selection picked enough around, and then the responses are coming diverse in all areas.
And then will they ensure that they have Spanish-speaking responses?
So the survey will be in Spanish and Vietnamese and English. And they have interpreters on staff for those languages. So if somebody wants to call and answer it in their native language on the phone, they can do that, or they can write it in response, and then they'll translate it for this English speaker.
So I know that the number 2 language in the schools is Russian. So I have no idea how big a gap that is, but was a surprising thing to pop up.
They can do additional languages. It just adds a little more cost. But
right. But they won't know until they call someone what language they speak, right?
Okay. And we picked the Vietnamese and Spanish because of the known communities that we want to make sure we target. And
I think with Vietnamese, you should make it more business owners than residents. So that may not be as appropriate for this one. But
Winter Hill Doe in the senior housing.
Oh, true. Right.
In the field. So I think there's...
Yep.
So it's interesting about Russian, but we'll see how the response is.
And I appreciate that you mentioned norming the survey against other jurisdictions. So as you put the questions together, there will be some specific ones that are similar to what this group has done with Arlington or other jurisdictions, so that they'll be able to really compare and say, 85% of your people are satisfied, which is in the X percentile.
And their conclusions that they bring out in the recommendations, they do interpret the data. They don't just give us the data. That's a very important piece of this as well.
Okay. A question, I would like to delve into customer service a little bit. I know I saw a question in, it might have been, I don't know if it's the Arlington or the Hampton one, about have you interacted with the government staff at all? And what was your experience, that kind of question. I think it would be helpful, and again, I don't know how you specifically get them, but, people who have had interactions with HHS or with Development Services or with the Treasurer's Office to find out what kind of service they've received. But again, I don't know how you do that if you're not targeting specifically.
Could you just list 10 different departments and say score on a 1 to 5 what your level of service was at the library, at the permit desk, at the treasurer's
Yeah, that's a good way to,
right?
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Right. Multiple choice, or just you have wait. I think this vendor needs to understand. We appreciate it, but we're very thirsty for why kind of group with specifics. So
right.
So general questions, I don't think are gonna fly for this group. So I actually love the fact that, you know, the standard for other jurisdictions is, well, heck, we're going to do a 30-minute survey. I'm like, you can get a lot with that if you ask the right question. I also think you're going to have to balance it and consider incentivizing like people to participate in the survey. We want it, we're very interested in the results, but you know, let's be strategic to make sure that when we hit to get the most outcome in that first hit, right? Because then we're going to burn through the money on that contract, going through multiple reps if we just don't think about how to maximize that first hit. So think about what their experience is with incentivizing responses and without driving up the cost too much. There must be some creative way to think about that.
One of the nice things with this vendor too is a set fixed price. So if there's extra stuff, they don't get to do a change order. So there's some nice things for that. They commit to that. But you can
Okay.
see in Arlington where they do some questions on satisfaction on certain surveys, and it has to be multiple choice, quick answer, not NA. One, people won't spend not everybody will spend a lot of time doing open-ended written responses, but also it'll be too hard to analyze and do any benchmarking if we have all open-ended questions. So it's a blend. But I do believe that they have several great templates to start with, and so we'll start there, and the input that you all are providing in terms of the whys, the customer service, how you get your information is helpful, because that's how we'll target it, and then we can look at some of those broader policies.
Yeah, and also if there's a way to extract, like, you know, what people want, right? Like, you know, there's a profile. I think that the resident of the future in Falls Church is going to be different 10 years from now than it is 5 years from now, 15 years from now, right? So I'm just trying to figure out where, you know, how, get a sense for where that, the folks that live here, you know, what is it that they want to see from them? Services. Not so much, I think it's important to understand nowadays. I don't know if you can not, you have to factor customer satisfaction into it. I mean, this is taxpayer services, so we provide some services. So I do think assessing where we sit on servicing the public to deliver, you know, services is an important part of this survey. But also additional things that they want, additional services in a contained way where it's not like the free-for-all.
Yeah, this is a tool. It won't answer all your questions, but I think it goes a long way to providing you all something you haven't. Your changing city is why we need to repeat this multiple times so you can track it and see what's changed.
Like that repetition.
I think this firm, because they ask satisfaction and priorization, the priorization gets a little bit at what you need and want. It's not, may not parse it out, but it'll cross the what's important to you, that priority, to how satisfied you are. So there may be something they want, even though they're super satisfied on everything else, but something is missing. Hopefully we'll parse that out.
They publish. So say we do a hit in, you know, 23. Do they publish it?
And we'll have the report. Robowski has a 6-week schedule that they propose. We'll tweak it to our schedule and workload to Mrs. Scott's piece, but I do believe we can manage it because they come with the core of it all teed up for us, and they do the heavy lift. But at the end of the time, we get the report and we can post it. And so theoretically in summer, you all would have that for noodling around as we start building budget guidance in November and do work.
All right, Mary Beth?
Sure, real fast. One is there a question there about how long you've lived in the city?
I will confirm. There's some core demographic data that we can get, and certainly that's what the city would have.
Because a new person's perspective may be very different. Right, exactly. Yeah. I don't know that you weight them, but just interesting
There
to
would
see
be,
people that, you know, have just moved in, have no idea
and you
about
have,
the AdCom building, for example.
and you can have owner rent.
Right. And then I saw in one of them, there was a question about schools. So if you're going to include a question about schools, I would ask that you just share with your counterpart in the schools to make sure they know that question's
Wyatt and I haven't
coming
had
up.
that conversation, whether it's just general government or schools, because the schools do a whole lot of their own work. So, but if we're including schools, coordinate with Chris and
Those who reply to the school survey are usually only those who have students currently in the schools. And I think it's really important to know what those who either no longer, never did, or are going to have kids feel about the schools that aren't currently.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And that's not who's targeted generally by the schools surveys.
Phil?
Ms. Hardy suggests that we extend the survey to the 31st minute in order to ask the question about tax rates. I support that thought. I think we should do it. And spring is good. And, let's just not overhope that it's going to guide us down the road that we're traveling anytime we deal with any issue that's got many dimensions and much nuance, and things evolve, over the course of the discussion about T-zones, for instance. We've had a lot of community learning already, and nobody's ever even yet cast a vote. So there's a role for surveys like this, I think, and, not to get around, but it's, 30 minutes is a while. But, looking at the questions, it's hard to knock particular questions out. I get it. And maybe we're so special that people will spend half an hour on the phone or online. So don't lowball it, I guess, in terms of numbers of questions, but also just be mindful of, the fact that people who get elected here and the people who work here day in and day out on staff are still going to have to do a lot of that prioritizing and choicing, and that is where the tax question comes in. It's hard to me to imagine anybody saying, "Oh, no, we're doing great on sidewalks. We got plenty of sidewalks," or fill in the blank with any other need. People want stuff here. It's just the way it is. And the question is, at what cost? And that's a decision that only the elected officials, in coordination with the staff, can make, I think. But I think it's a good exercise, though. Be interesting to see what happens.
Letty?
Yeah, my final question. Do we get access to this data ourselves?
Are the questions proprietary? If some
Like-
group wanted to, take a ton of the questions and ask their own subset of neighbors or businesses or whatever, would we own that property?
we own the questions and the data, and with their dashboard, we can make it available externally, and you could play with the numbers and the data. You will not get confidential identifiers or any information about who responded. But if you wanted to sort the data by a certain neighborhood or a certain age group or a certain ethnic area, you can
Okay, because I think,
play with it and
yeah,
have
Mary
fun
Beth's
with
question
the
about like tenure in the city, like I think that would be interesting to kind of cut the data on preferences depending on how long you've been in the city, your demographic, where you might live. And so if we have access to that, we don't necessarily need the consultant to do that.
and it just changes your bar graph, and then you'll get an updated with what you sorted in or out.
Great.
All right, thanks very much. That concludes that portion of our conversation. Why don't we take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 9:54.
Oopsie.
We did so well on time.
Voila. Oh.
Find the water up there.
All right. You guys ready to get back at it?
Think about it. I don't think it needs much longer.
Cindy, are you ready to quickly go through the legislative update? All right, let's do a quick version of it.
All right, so for a quick version, thank you, Sophie, for sharing, because otherwise my photo was really big. So the document that Sherry put up for Sophie, sorry. I was working with Sherry this afternoon on retirement board, sorry. This document is the tracking document that I provided the legislative committee. I updated it just before this evening because of General Assembly working through the weekend. So I will share this out to council and the legislative committee after tonight. There's some few things that I just wanted to highlight. I'm not going to go through all. So jumping down to line 42, we had several bills that we worked with Senator Peterson on that popped up sort of at the last minute. Unfortunately, on the Senate side, we've been successfully having those bills not make it out of Senate. One was a natural gas one that's showing on the screen. If it's crossed out, it means it's died, but this was an important one with our new senator, so I wanted to highlight it, soon to be new senator, where we would have lost all local control over where they're sited in terms of right-of-way and so on. So that was positive that that is not alive. Also, there would have been on line 50 a procurement act that would have eliminated our ability to do CMAR construction tools like we did for Library and City Hall, and we talked to Senator Peterson with this when we were down in Richmond. It has died on the Senate. It unfortunately is still alive in the House, so we're working to not have it successful on crossover. Yeah, the TP3 tied into the CMAR, so yes. Line 105 is the sales tax. That has died on the Senate side. It's still in limbo on the House side, but it doesn't look like it's crossing over. So I think we're good on not losing the 1% money for local grocery sales tax and local services. Jumping down to 151, there was is a pedestrian walkability crosswalk bill that Senator Provalvo put out. It has come out of the Senate but hasn't fully passed the floor, so we're monitoring it. It is one that's positive with the amendments to make sure that people and scooters and bikes and all move through the intersection safely. But it does change that allows bikers and scooters to go with the lights. So we're monitoring that one. It's not as clear in the state code. So the intent is good. The way the bill was initially written needs some clarification. Not doing a deep dive on transportation, but some of the bills that were problematic have written to be better, so they're not taking money off of transit, but that it's an allowable activity. So we're continuing to monitor that. Rolling down to line 246, there was a lot happening on school bus safety zone kind of areas around schools. And so on the one that would have dropped the fines on school bus arms, that did not survive change in the penalty, but it did lessen if you go past a school bus when it's stopped, it won't go on your driver's license, but still you have to pay the fine. So we're hoping not to have that survive at the end of the day, but it is still alive and well. They did increase the school boundaries for a school zone to 750 feet, so that's a plus. So it gives more protection. Towing bills that would not have allowed us to have local control have died, so that seems to be coming out well. Line 274, this is one that didn't get a lot of highlight, but with our discussion of resiliency and our environmental focus, I did want to highlight this bill that it looks like there'll be an opportunity for local incentives for urban green spaces. So if you want to work on Heat Island and some of those resiliency things, there will be an option for tax incentives or other flexibility. And then 285, Chesapeake Bay Watershed Implementation Plan. This and the next one down at 293, we're dealing with putting stuff in comp plan, which City of Falls Church already does, but this is having more localities do it and help address resiliency to Ms. Hardy's earlier points and questions. The bill was put in by Delegate Lavola, who we worked with on stormwater. Good intention, but it was a shall mandate, and so to keep local authority, it has been amended to be permissive. So it's just encouraged, so that's positive. On the not positive side, just about everything on the affordable housing side that we wanted for good studies or local rent stabilization, possible authority, or tenant rights. So all the way through line 375 is basically dead. So no good outcomes in this General Assembly session. Swatting, which is one of the new priority positions council put in, which is line 378, is alive and well and looks like it will come out, so that it'll be a fine if people do make false emergency calls. And they are also, there's a parallel bill to, if you make false 911 calls on any type of device, text, mobile, it also be a fine. Yeah, and a class 1 misdemeanor. Yeah. So it's gone from like goes from nothing to a start, but yeah. Public meeting and electronic participation, mixed results there. The bill that requires live broadcast and archiving is alive and passing over at crossover. For us, that works for most of our meetings, like this evening, council is live broadcast. But it would be a real big fiscal impact for a lot of localities. So they have reduced it that you don't have to do it if it costs more than $100. So at least it puts some parameters. We're still working to get it clarified, because is it a public meeting such as tonight or a regular council meeting, or is it ribbon cutting? So we need to make sure public meeting is appropriately defined.
And does it apply to board and commission meetings?
Right now, it's local governing body, so they have limited it to that. For electronic meetings, there is a bill that would increase it to 50% for non-policy-making boards, so your boards and commissions. It got a substitute bill, which is not good, and I was reviewing it with city attorney and city clerk today. So the original bill was better than the substitute that came out, so we're going to have to work on that. One of the positive things on the public meetings is line 448, which is standardization of public notices. They're finally consolidated in all one place and making it consistent, so everything will be 14 days, 10 days, 21 days, but it's not this for zoning and this for that. And so this one's a good, DML worked really hard on this. Generally, on the Senate side, good weapon bills have come out where it's regulating where a minor is present, how you have to, who can buy, sell, unintended in a motor vehicle. Those type of things are good. There was an effort to roll back the local authority that you all have to regulate on public facilities and public parks and land. So far, died in the Senate, and it's in limbo and didn't seem to come out of the House for crossover. So I think we're okay there. And those are some of the major bill highlights. Budget came out Sunday. I did a quick synopsis for you all via email. Not a lot of details till tomorrow at noon. So after that, we'll be able to see specifics to the 14 million that Senator Saslaw put in, and then some drop-down details. But there is positive on mental health, behavioral, police, and sheriff funding. The Senate side did put in funding to replace, make whole the schools for the DOE's formula error in the basic aid. So there's some positive stuff in the budget, but the House is using a revenue projection of $1 billion less than the Senate, so they have $1 billion with a B. So obviously their revenue and expenditures are very different than the Senate, so we're going to be seeing a lot of work in conference to conform the budget. The House is using the governor's tax cuts and the Senate is not, so.
And the city has done anything on holding school divisions harmless because of their VDOE error?
On the Senate side,
okay.
yes, but not on the House.
Sorry, I missed that.
So budget out February 5th. We'll see the details of the budgets tomorrow at noon. Crossover officially starts tomorrow. And theoretically, General Assembly adjourns on the 25th with the budget this year. So that's the update. And we have a Finance Committee meeting scheduled for February 5th.
Well, thanks for all the great work you've done on this. I know it's an incredible amount of detail and much appreciated. All right, let's move on now to the future consent items. Who's handling that, Mr. Shields? It looks like there's just one anyway.
So this, just very briefly, is a contract renewal with LMI and MC Dean for our traffic signals and street lights.
Okay, and the amount of that is?
I don't recall,
Okay.
but that is for consent next week. So if you are if anybody had any questions in the staff report, let us know prior to posting the agenda so we can try to address it in the staff report.
I will note that Zach is still on the meeting.
Wow.
Yeah, in case there's some immediate question for
Yeah,
the
I have a
Public
question.
Works Director.
While Zach is here, I do have a question, unless someone else wants to go first. So we've had a number of malfunctions and outages with our lights, and I know LMI has been the main vendor we've used. Are we satisfied with their performance, even though they were responsive to the bid?
We are satisfied with LMI's performance. The issues we are experiencing are not from anything LMI has done for us. They're simply the aging out of the traffic signals. In essence, the traffic signals are showing their age, and we need to try and get on top of that.
So LMI did not install the original equipment for us?
No, the original equipment, in all honesty, probably predates me being alive. It's honestly, it's that old. Like I mean, I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek to be a little jovial about it, but the equipment that we have as a city is 40 to 50 years old. It's from the 80s, if not the late 70s. There is nothing new about it, and in many cases, it has either reached or exceeded its design life, which is what's causing a lot of the issues.
Okay, so it's not something that's like under warranty that we would then hold like LMI?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Now, didn't we do a budget amendment where we did increase funding for signals?
We did, so that's put in
Yes.
motion a lot of replacements of these, and we'll need to sustain that.
Okay, great. That was it.
And while there's a pause, I will note, just very briefly, the total contract award, it's a reoccurring on-call contract, as Mr. Shields noted. I can't remember how many years it can be renewed for, but the total dollar amount per year would be $500,000. Some of the numbers laid out in the staff report is we spend about $200,000 just on maintenance, $50,000 on emergency callouts. So that's after hours. It could be a signal that's dark, a signal on flash. So 250 just in maintenance, right? That could be something as swapping a component that has burned out, changing a program, going out and hitting a reset button, and then the remainder, about 200 to 250,000 is upgrades. So as Ms. Hardy mentioned, that's replacing a signal cabinet at Broad and Maple. That's adding the pedestrian signals at Great Falls and Lincoln, those type of projects. So just for a budgetary kind of feel of where we are at.
I assume if you're, Debbie, I just had a quick thought about, we had a lot of components that took a long time to get to us. They're pandemic related. Presumably they suffered equally as other vendors would. Like there's no reason to make a different vendor change. That was just overarching, presumably. When
Correct. Yeah, that was
one at Washington.
Yes, that was an overarching throughout the industry. Lead times are not as bad as they were. They are still not back to what we would consider normal. Instead of like a year, we're looking at like 6 to 8 months on stuff that used to take 6 to 8 weeks. So not great, but we are seeing some progress on lead times.
So can I ask, so you're awarding it to 2 vendors, one primary and secondary. Each one gets $200,000 for the first year.
So the total amount we can spend between 2 vendors would be $500,000. MC Dean is the, let me rephrase that. LMI is the lowest bidder. They would be our primary contractor for preventative maintenance, regularly scheduled maintenance, emergency callouts. MC Dean is our backup vendor for emergency callouts if LMI is unable to make it. For any upgrades that we would do, right, replacing a signal cabinet, installing pedestrian signals, our typical SOP is to reach out to both vendors, receive a price, and then proceed forward based on the lowest, most responsive price.
How much of our local budget are we tying up into this contract? $500,000
I'm sorry.
or $200,000?
I'm sorry, you broke up there. I didn't catch all that.
Zach, I guess what my question is, how much of our local money are we tying up in this contract? Is it $200,000 or $500,000?
I can pretty confidently say we are going to spend between $200,000 and $250,000 just to keep the signals functioning. We will spend another $200 to $250 in upgrades. Again, that's a traffic signal cabinet that is skipping a green light, adding in pedestrian heads. It's kind of the above and beyonds of the stuff that it's aged past its useful life.
Okay.
Phil said, hopefully, and without taking his shoe off and pounding on the table, that he hopes that that second category includes the Gresham Place signal, which is skipping a green in your parlance. Unless somebody has information to the otherwise. Is there otherwise information on that one?
So I can jump in. It's not that Gresham is skipping a green, it's that Gresham is not technically part of the signal that is out there right now. We could use these contracts to update that signal. $250,000 is not going to be enough to do that. By the time we go through engineering, we order everything, we get it in. If it's enough, it is the budget, right? That means we're not replacing cabinets that are failing. We're not replacing detection. We're not doing pedestrian upgrades at other signals. Gresham needs to be its own project, to be frank.
I figured that's where the journey was taking us. Thank you for that answer. So that, Mr. Shields, remains an item of discussion for the budget, I presume.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
One other comment, Cindy, maybe you and I could look at the available criteria for funding and see if there isn't something on traffic signals that we could take advantage of.
We do have traffic signals included in RSTP parent grant and the multimodal funding that we just got from Congressman Byer. Those are plugged into the CIP, so when there's traffic signals in the capital projects, Zach can access that for those projects. This is more of his maintenance and operating and below the capital thresholds. We have two sort of parallel tracks for track fix.
All right, let's just double check to see if there might be a source out there to assistant of funding.
That'd be great.
All right. Let's go on to see if there are any council schedule or comments or any other council discussion that anyone would like to make before we go. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. Wyatt, Celeste and I have something to add to the consent agenda. I think per our emails, we need to add Debbie to GovOps as a committee member. So we can do that by amending the appointments that we did at the beginning of the year. I thought she was always on GovOps. Apparently she's not. So that should be a quick, hopefully, consent item. And then, so GovOps is not happening tomorrow as listed on the schedule. It's moved, I think, to the 21st at 3 o'clock. That's it.
Okay, what else do we have? Anything else? Ms. Connolly?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Just a heads up that I will be in, I hope, Tennessee next Monday, so I'll be asking for a remote participation permission for medical purposes, taking care of, trying to see if we can get Dad in a new situation, and me too, for that matter. But anyway, I'll be calling in from Knoxville for next Monday's meeting.
Okay, Ms. Connolly?
Mr. Bradley, it looks like he hung up. The Oak Street Bridge project that's going on, it's been advertised a little bit. I happened to just ask a neighbor today if they'd heard anything about it, and they have not gotten any messages out to the neighborhood. I know we have a really good list from the neighborhood traffic calming, but if they're really going to close down that street next Monday, we probably should tell the neighbors.
Yeah, so we'll probably, we'll need to do door hangers and that type of thing. Yeah, right.
There are street signs that can go out there. As a school staffer, I met with the new engineer to talk about the Tiger Trail and how we're going to reroute kids. And that still seems a little bit up in the air as of this afternoon. So hopefully that will get resolved.
You route car traffic in general. So if someone comes down Oak or Lee and then they stop because they can't keep going, do they then do a bunch of illegal U-turns in the middle of the street?
Well, that was what the conversation we had today was. They were talking about, are they going to shut it off at Lee? Are they going to use Lee for staging? So yeah, I thought they would be able to do that whole loop, but I think it might be shut off. Like Lee can be a dead end to the cul-de-sac, and Oak is completely closed to through traffic. So all that kind of stuff probably needs to be told.
Yes, we'll get more details on that, but the signage should be really apparent right when you start on Oak if you're.
It's not a through street anymore.
Right.
Traffic, right.
And to prevent just that.
And then my other question is just, we had done in our budget amendment money for public art projects and covering the utility boxes. And I just want to encourage us to, now that there's a new employee at Cherry Hill Farmhouse, we'll be working with the Arts and Humanities Council to kick that one up again as a project that we need to get going.
As a first step, why I think we're waiting to hear from Public Works on a refreshed list of which boxes should be eligible for art, and then maybe the new person can take it from there.
Okay, anything else? Ms. Hiscott?
One calendar note, it's not until the 27th, but I will be remote, participating, but remotely on the 27th. Travel.
Anything else? Should we call it a night? Let's call it a night. All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Council.